Notre Dame fans, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. That's Ryan Roberts. I'm Brian Driscoll. We got a lot to discuss today, Ryan. Today's show, we're going to talk about the injury to Beau Bauer, what that means for Notre Dame defensively, special teams wise, leadership wise. We'll dive into that a little bit. Just talk briefly about some of the possible replacements that Coach Freeman discussed today, what we think about who should be the replacements and how the linebacker rotation should look now moving forward. We are also going to get into our keys to victory, which is what the primary focus of this show was supposed to be. It will still be so, but we will discuss the Beau Bauer stuff first. Also want to remind people that we will have our last IB Nation Sports Talk show of the week will be tonight. Ryan and I will be together again tomorrow for our prediction show, obviously for Notre Dame, but also some big games this weekend. Had to call Vince last night, Ryan, because there's so many big games this week. We had to kind of break down who was going to cover which games on the Saturday IB Countdown to Kickoff show, which is from 10 to noon, and which games we would focus on. There's going to be some carryover, but there will be some games that they're going to spend a lot more time on Saturday than we will. And, of course, if you are going to be at Notre Dame on Saturday, or if you're around town, about 3 o'clock to 3:30 is the range we're looking at. There's just a lot of factors that are going to play to it. But if you can get there around 3 o'clock, we're going to be somewhere over by the Dome. I will tweet out where we are, where we're going to be set up on Saturday. So we'll be on campus for sure. Going to have a very important show on Saturday. I want as many people there as possible. I promise you, we can't say what it is, but I promise you it'll be worth it. I promise you that you'll want to be there for that. There's no doubt about it. And so we will go live around 3:30. We'll already be set up. The table will be set up. Ryan will still be in Jersey, but I'll be on campus, live on location. Plan on having some special guests on the show on Saturday. We plan on breaking some news on the show on Saturday. You're going to want to be there live. Just trust me on this one. Just have a little faith in me on this one. But, we'll have more detail. You can follow me at Coach D178 on Twitter. Of course, we'll talk about it on the message boards as well, where you can find that at boards.irishbreakdown.com. But it's going to be a lot of fun. I really am looking forward to having a lot of people there. I think the more people that are there in person, there's no charge. There's no cost to you. There's nothing like that. This isn't a money-making scheme. This is going to be a cool event. And I want as many people there as possible making some noise and having some fun. So promise you that it'll be worth it to you. So if you're tailgating, if you're on campus, make sure you set an alarm to be over by the Golden Dome around, right between 3 and 3:30. So you'll definitely be part of that. So Ryan, let's begin with the Beau Bauer news. Obviously, Marcus Freeman announced today what we learned on Tuesday, which is that Beau Bauer is out for the season. He injured his knee in practice. And it was one there was a no-doubter. It was going to cost him his final season. It's a very disappointing injury for a lot of reasons. One is because it happened this week instead of last week. If it would have happened last week in preparation for BYU, Beau could have had a red shirt because Beau never actually took a red shirt. Beau played as a freshman on special teams. He played 5 years in Notre Dame because of the COVID year. But he could have technically had a chance to get because the injury could have then given him a chance for his traditional 5th season.
Yeah.
So it's a very disappointing loss for Beau. Just to begin with, Ryan, we'll get into the specifics of what's next. Beau hadn't been a huge factor on defense this year outside of the goal line, but as we have seen and we saw against BYU in those goal line situations, he was very effective. He'd been very good, but he's a great special teams player.
Yes.
He's a much needed emotional presence on this football team. He is a leader of this football team, and as someone that is associated with the program told me today, the first response was, he's a Notre Dame man. And this is the second one of those that you've lost this year. And you look at Avery Davis. Was Avery Davis a earth-shattering loss from a player standpoint? No. Is Beau Bauer an earth-shattering loss from a player production standpoint? No. Are those two huge losses from a leadership and a character standpoint? I know they're around the team and all that, but it'll be different, especially for the next couple of weeks as Beau is, going to have the surgery and the rehab and all that. It's just harder to be there when you've got the helmet on, you're out there battling with your teammates. And I think more than anything, the special teams and the leadership, Ryan, is really going to hurt this team. And it's going to be a blow to this team. I shouldn't say it's going to hurt the team as if it's going to, ensure that bad things are going to happen. It's a big loss that they're going to have to work hard to try and overcome.
Yeah, I mean, Beau's a glue guy, man. Like, he is on this team, right? Like, he's that guy that every day during practice, every game, no matter how much he's playing, how little he's playing, what his role in the team is, you know that he's going to be there and he's going to be there with energy, right? Like that's the biggest thing that Beau Bauer has exemplified. He's a great leader on this team, a guy that is well respected by his teammates. And like you said, Brian, he's probably Notre Dame's best coverage player as far as from a special teams perspective, right? Like this kid he runs down like a bat out of hell on kickoff, on punts. Like he is that dude for this team. So really sad news to hear for a guy that has done everything that he has been asked to do, right? Did he ever develop into a great linebacker at Notre Dame? No, he didn't. But what he did was he did every single thing that this coaching staff has ever asked of him, and he did it with a smile on his face, and he did it with energy. And it's a loss. It is a loss from a special teams perspective, but more importantly, it's a loss because he is a great leader, a great young man, and he is what Notre Dame should be from a person perspective. So it is a loss, and it's very sad. I'm just really, really saddened for Beau because he's done everything that he's supposed to be doing it for the team.
Well, you talk about he's never really developed to an impact linebacker, and I think that even speaks more volumes about the fact that he was able to become a captain and such a leader of the team as a non-starter.
Yep.
I mean, Beau's never really started at middle linebacker except for a couple games this year when JD Bertrand was out because of targeting. Mm-hmm. Beau has never really been a starter on special team on defense, and yet was still able to become a key team leader and key captain of this football team and emotionally of this football team, which again says a lot for a kid who's for all intents and purposes, a backup to earn the kind of role that he has as a leader of this football team. And I just think it speaks volumes about him as a young man. Yep. And if you've ever met his parents, you're like, okay, yeah, I get it. Just a great family, and it just stinks. It stinks for him. It stinks for the team. But look, they've also got games to still play. Right. Yep. And I guarantee Beau Bauer will be the first one to start talking about next man in. And that's kind of what the conversation is here. It'll be a little easier to replace him on defense. I mean, I think there's several options. Number one, obviously just the next Mike linebackers. JD Bertrand, stop getting kicked out of games for targeting. That makes things a lot harder. Number one, I think just maybe a few more snaps for JD, which may not be a bad thing, Ryan. I just feel like maybe JD hasn't been able to get into a flow this year just because of all the rotating and packages and all that kind of stuff. It's harder for younger players to get into the flow of a game because they just don't have the experience that NFL players have, right? That are able to do those type of things. Obviously, Junior Tuihalamaka is a guy that could have a chance to get some more snaps. And something that Coach Freeman brought up today at the beginning, and I don't know if he was talking about Prince first in response to the question, which was leading to talk about Prince first, or if he would have done it anyway. But the conversation was about Prince Colley. And does this present more opportunities for Prince Colley to play at Mike linebacker? I don't want that to be the case, to be honest with you, because right now with the way that Maris Lufau is playing, I think Prince needs to get a lot of the snaps at will. And I think they need to have JD and Junior be more of a factor at Mike, in my opinion. I don't want Jack Kaiser to be more of an interior presence. I know people have talked about it, and he's had some good snaps at will. But Ryan, you and I were talking about how much he struggled at playing inside against Cal. Remember the bad fits he had against Cal and North Carolina? Yes, he played well against BYU. I still don't think Jack is a ideal inside player. He's about the same size as Drew White. He just doesn't pack the same punch that Drew had as an inside player. Yep. And so I think you're hurting Jack by moving him inside. I think Jack is good where he is. Let him be a rover, play inside and passing downs, and then that needs to be his role. I hope that it's more of Bertrand Tuihalamaka. Now, the concern is this is a very complex defense. Somebody asked me today to describe Al Golden, and I think you're gonna get this. He's a competent version of what Brian Van Gorder thought he was. Right? So Brian Van Gorder struggled as bad as he did, not because of his complexity of his defense, just because he's not a good football coach. He's a bad football coach. Al Golden is cut from a similar cloth in that he's a guy that's been in the NFL a while, and he's trying to be more really complex and putting different defenses in every week and just trying to treat this more like the NFL than college football. And the group that struggled the most and had the biggest issue with that has been the linebacker position, which is why we've seen the regression that we've seen. And so now my concern is he's just going to start moving the veterans around to fill that role, as opposed to saying, hey, we've got this 6'2", 240-pound kid. We're about to play some teams coming up, Syracuse, Clemson, Navy, teams like that, where you're going to need a kid like that to really be a factor. Let's get him rolling. Let's get him going. If that means we got to maybe scale back some stuff when he's in the game, then flip and scale back some stuff, right? That's what good coaches do.
Yeah.
And so that's my fear, is that they're not going to do that they're going to choose to play the veterans because the veterans know what to do.
Mm-hmm.
And that's my concern.
It's going to be interesting to watch, man. Like, I'm just, to your point, Brian, I think the natural thing is, and we agree 100% on this, right? I think that we've said both on the show the last couple of days, even dating back to the post-game show on Saturday, like Prince Kollie needs to play more. But I'm also in the agreement that Prince might be a Mike long-term if he keeps getting bigger, right? Like, he could be that guy, but right now I think he needs to play Will. I think he does. And especially because Maris Loifau has struggled in his own right? So it can't just be a thing where Maris is just your de facto starter and then you're rotating the mic. Like, Maris needs to be pressured a little bit too, as far as, guys challenging for some playing time, right? So I agree with you. Keep Prince there. Don't mess with that. Junior Tuihalamaka is the easy answer for me, right? Like, he's a natural Mike. He's a freshman, sure, but you have a guy like J.D. Bertrand in front of him who's a senior, right? We just talked about it yesterday. He had 100-plus tackles last year as a junior. Like, he's played football, and he's played pretty good level of football for most of the time at Notre Dame. Like, obviously, there's been up and down, especially this year, but you have a guy with experience in front of him to bring along a guy like a Junior Tuihalamaka. It's not like you're throwing two freshmen into the fold and being like, sink or swim time. Like, you have some insurance with the J.D. Bertrand, but then you have a Junior Tuihalamaka who should be the next man up, because, to your point, you need that 6'2", 240-pound hammer at some point. Like, you're going to need that guy, right? So this is an unfortunate circumstance with Beau Bauer, but kind of like the injury to Kevin Bauman, this could open up opportunities for a really talented younger player. And I hope that Notre Dame takes advantage of that, because I think we saw in the spring, in fall practice, that Junior Tuihalamaka is ready to play some snaps. Is he ready to start full-time? Probably not, but he should be able to come in and give you some snaps. So I'm very interested to see if that is the answer, because I think it should be, right? Like, I don't think the biggest concern I have, and you mentioned it already, is that they're like, oh, we're just going to rotate Jack Kaiser inside more. And it's just like, that's not the answer, right? It's not.
I don't think it is. Yeah. I mean, because look, Beau played 25 snaps against Ohio State. He played 24 snaps against Marshall. The next 3 games, he played 9, 7, and 6. Those are the snaps that you're replacing on defense. It's those. And so it's not like you're having to find a way to replace 30 snaps, right? It's a couple snaps. It's like 6 to 9 snaps a game in the last 3 games. Yep. Junior Tuihalamaka in the last 2 games has played 3 and 2. Okay. And 2, 3, and 2, mostly goal line situations. Okay. So here's what you do. It's real simple. Give him those extra 6 to 8 snaps a game. I mean, that's
so he plays 10 snaps a game.
Like, yeah, right. Exactly. I mean, that's where you've been. Now, we've seen Jack Kaiser play inside more. Perhaps the thinking could be, hey, look, we're going to have Prince rotate both spots. I don't think that, like, my fear is that they're going to try to ask Prince Kollie to play both spots and rotate in both spots. I think that would be a big mistake, because Prince is still a sophomore. He's still learning this defense. He's starting to get comfortable at will. Don't now thrust another huge responsibility on his shoulders. And that's my fear, is what's going to happen. Knowing how this staff has handled things, the fact that even their 2 deep is a dead giveaway of the way they're thinking, where like Jack Kaiser and J.D. Bertrand are like at every position as either starters or backups, is like they're going to get their veterans in. And I think then you put him in the game, and then lo and behold, Prince is going to struggle trying to play 2 different positions as a true sophomore when your senior returning starters are struggling to figure out the ability to do that. And it's just going to continue to be what we've seen all year. That's my like worst case scenario situation. And I think that's why I think it's just simple, is to let JD play Mike, let Junior play Mike, let Prince and Maris play Will, let Jack play Rover, and then let Jack I think Jack Kaiser is the guy that probably has shown the best ability to move around and be somewhat competent at different positions. Although, again, he's had his struggles this year too. I think maybe you have him, because the other thing is what hurts you too is the loss of Tariq Bracy for this game. Because if Tariq Bracy was back, maybe not this game, you may not have done it, but in future games, you can just start playing more nickel. Because you can play a lot more nickel against UNLV. You can play a lot more nickel against Clemson. You can play a lot more nickel, especially against like USC and teams like that, Ryan, to where you could then have your rotation inside being, Marist and Jack at will, and then Prince and JD at Mike. Something like that could be an option. But end of the day, I still feel like the best option is to let Prince continue to get comfortable at will, and then let Junior get those 6 to 9 snaps a game that Beau was playing, right? I mean, that's what I just don't see the need to start moving a bunch of guys around to take over 6 to 9 snaps. It just doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
And the linebacker group as a whole has struggled this year, Brian, for the vast majority, right? Yeah. So I think asking guys to do multiple things is not the answer to making that better, right? Like you need to compartmentalize, and ask a guy to play specific roles in your defense and make them good at one particular thing. Prince Conley's had some success playing Will over the last couple of games. Don't ruin that momentum, right? Like just keep him where he's doing, keep him comfortable, and let him get faster. Like he's going to get faster as he gets more experience, sees things a little quicker. Don't mess with that maturation, because that's the one. I mean, even though it's been limited, like Prince has been a bright spot for your linebacker room in a room that has had its struggles, right? So do not ask guys to do too much, departmentalize, and create specific roles for players. I think that's how you get the most out of this team right now, or most out of the group, I should say.
What's frustrating is they continue to do it even despite all the struggles. It's like they're just thinking that at some point in time the light's going to go on and they're going to figure it out. And maybe it does.
Right.
But I think the fact that you did that is why your linebackers play so bad against Marshall, which had a huge role in your victory. And look, there's a lot of reasons Notre Dame lost to Marshall. A lot. Sure. So I'm not trying to say this is the only reason. I'm simply saying if there's 3 positions on this team that if against Marshall, if just that position alone would have played better, they'd have won.
Right.
Quarterback was one, right? Tyler had 2 big misses in that game where if he makes those throws, they win the game. Okay. It's not all his fault. It was a team loss. I'm just simply saying 3 groups that if they just would have played better, this team wins. Second one is the offensive line. Yes. If they would have played better against Marshall, with everything else being the same, they would have won the game. And the third is linebacker. If the linebackers would have played better against Marshall, just the linebackers on defense, and just played good football, not even great football, they played bad football, they win this game because they'd have stopped the 3rd and long, at their own, when they were at 15-12, they wouldn't have given up some of the long runs to Kalen LeBourne. They'd have played better football. And the reason is because they're asking these guys to do a lot. And that's a mistake. And then they don't do the same stuff week after week. They change their defense up. I mean, Ryan, you watch the film. They're asking these linebackers to do different things every single week. And I'm not talking about adjusting to what the team – I'm talking like looks like a new defense.
Yeah.
And that's asking a lot of a bunch of kids who really only have 1 year starting under their belt. And in the instance of Maris Luafau and Prince Colley, very little – I mean, no starts under their belt, right? Maris had, 1 in 2020?
Yep.
So I just think that was a tactical mistake that they have just kind of said, we're just going to keep chugging along. And that's why I'm my fear. Now, if I'm wrong and they say, hey, look, this injury forces us to kind of do this, then great. That's actually a blessing.
Yeah.
But I don't have optimism that that's going to be the case, to be honest with you. Right. And that's
see what happens, man.
I
mean, it's going to be, Brian, I mean, I'm at the point with the linebackers where it's like, it can't get much worse, right? Like it can't get much worse. It can only get better, right?
It can. And that's the thing that's the concern is it can,
scary to think.
To think. I mean, it can, look, it can, they can start making more mistakes. They can start making more, they can miss more tackles. There's a lot of different things that can go into this, Ryan, because it's one of those things where it's not to the point yet where it can, where we can say, oh, hey, look, it can't get worse. Yeah, it can, sadly. And that's up to the staff to make it look. Al Golden's a really smart guy. And Tommy Reese is a really smart guy. The problem is I just think both, for different reasons, are making this too much about how smart they are and not putting enough emphasis on what can my guys do. Because a lot of the big plays, a lot of the mistakes are because you put a guy in position to do something that he should not have been in position to do, or that's the case of Jaden Mickey, which they've done twice now for game-changing touchdowns.
Yeah.
Or you have put so much on your linebackers' plates that they just can't execute simple things that we've seen them execute for 2 years, right? And so when that's happening, that's where I hope that what Marcus Freeman said in his press conference on Monday is true, where he's like, we have to look at ourselves first as coaches. And if you're not willing to do that and then say, hey, look, because look, the light's eventually going to go on for these guys.
For sure.
But what's going to be the cost beforehand? And that's my concern.
Yeah.
Because you can beat Stanford with bad linebacker. You can beat Stanford with bad linebacker play. Dude, they beat BYU in North Carolina with bad linebacker play. And those teams are better than Stanford. It's not about that. This is why I always say you got to be process driven, not results driven. Because if you're just results driven, like, hey, look, we just beat North Carolina, BYU, 2 really good football teams, and you did. But if you'd have played the way you did the last 2 weeks against Marshall, you'd be 4-1 right now. If you play the way you did the last 2 weeks against Clemson, you're going to get a loss. If you play the way you did the last 2 weeks against USC, especially the way you played against BYU, you're going to lose. And that's the thing is it's not about did you do enough to beat BYU. It's did you play to the Notre Dame standard? Are you doing things that are allowing your players to maximize their potential? And on both sides of the ball right now, this football program is not doing that. And yes, they're getting better, they're progressing, but there's still too many things from a coaching standpoint that are holding them back. And it's not lack of experience at head coach. It's not those. It's your coordinators are still trying to show everyone how smart they are. And that's what's happening at Alabama right now with their offense. Is you have an offensive coordinator that tries to show everybody how smart he is, and then he outthinks his own players, and that's how you barely beat Texas A&M, right? And then you have other offenses that are just like, hey, what can our guys do well? Let's thrive at that, and then we're going to go out there and be successful. And so that's kind of the Beau injury kind of led to this rant, but that's my big concern going into this game is you got to find that balance between how smart you are and the there's a breaking point for your players on how much you can give them before you start having, it starts paying negative dividends. And that's the issue that we've seen at line. And it's been the issue of the defensive line at times too, Ryan, where the defensive line, you can clearly see there's a lot of thinking going on. And those are positions that you cannot have that at all.
Reactionary positions. Yep. Agreed.
So Ryan, let's next get into the keys to the game. And this is a game where for Notre Dame, where it's as you said, it's a get right game. You can look at it as a jump game, which means your team can take a big jump. It's also a game that can be a stumbling block because, Coach Freeman talked about today, the film is a lot better than the results. And to a degree, he's right. They're a little better than 1-4, but not much. They should have beat Oregon State. They should be 2-3. So technically he's right. They should be a 2-3 football team right now. But they're not because they're just not a really good football team. However, as we said earlier in the week, they are a dangerous football team because they are good enough in spots that if you don't play well and you don't kind of minimize the areas where they're strong, they can make this a game. And then you're a mistake here, a mistake there away from losing. Because listen, if you can lose to Marshall, you can lose to Stanford. Sure. Right. And this is another one of those games that even more so than the last couple games, Ryan, that we're going to learn a lot about this team. And here's what I mean by that. It's not hard to get up for the Carolina game. They were undefeated and blowing people out and scoring 50 points a game. It was easy to get ready for that game. The BYU game, same way. You're going away from home to Vegas, number 16 team in the country. They're a good football team. I mean, it's easy to get up for that one. The last couple times we've seen Notre Dame get on the field against clearly inferior opponents, they didn't play well. They didn't play well against Marshall. They didn't play well against Cal. They did enough to win against Cal, but they didn't play well. Not for 4 quarters. So we are going to learn if this team is ready, if this team is truly grown by how they play. And if they come out and they are a more mature team, a more focused team, they have built on that. They're not the team that we saw against Marshall and Cal, which I don't think they are. Then this team's going to come out and roll today or Saturday. If they're not, then they're going to stumble and bumble, and I'll be shocked if they lose. To be honest with you, I will. But it's just a game where you can't This is a game where if you're not playing your backups in the fourth quarter, then you're doing something wrong, in my opinion. So we're going to break down the keys to making that happen, Ryan.
Yep.
And we're going to first start with the offense. The biggest one, Ryan, it's we're gonna put 2 into 1, and I'm going to say what the keys are and allow you to kind of expand on it. We're going to put 2 into 1 because they're sort of repeats of last week, but we think they're very important, not just for this game, but big picture for Notre Dame. Notre Dame has scored 6 points on offense in the first quarter of games this year. So the first key is about getting a fast start, and that starts with controlling the line of scrimmage, which means establishing the ground attack, giving Drew Pine time to play. They've got to come out and immediately start fast, and the fast start needs to be built around controlling the line of scrimmage, right? That is where this game – I mean, ultimately we could have stopped right there, but that is absolutely the first key to this game for Notre Dame.
I mean, it's the number one key for both sides of the coin too, Brian, because it's like Notre Dame has not done that well, right? Like they have not got off to great starts. And on the other side of it, Stanford has actually played pretty tough during the early stretches of football games, right? Like they're usually fading in the second half because there's lack of depth or talent at certain positions. Like that's where they kind of hit their breaking point, and they tend to break the bad way, right? So in both instances, Notre Dame needs to get off to a great start because, one, they need to change it up on their own end, right? Like they need to show that they can grow in that department. And number two, if you get up on a Stanford team that typically loses its fizz down the stretch of a game, you're going to have that blowout win, man, because they're going to, I don't want to say give up, but like they're going to hit a breaking point.
They're on the verge of it, Ryan, and we saw it last year. They battled. They had some close, tough losses, but after a while, it's just like, dude, what the heck?
Yeah, it's
and then they just got destroyed in every game they played in down the stretch.
After you get to a 1-4 record, Brian, where your one win is over a not great football team, right? Yeah, exactly. I didn't want to throw shade at the Colgate at the.
Well, I mean, we're not going to throw shade at the name.
I'm just kidding.
The team stinks.
It's FCS
Colgate
team.
stinks.
Yeah. Patriot League.
They're not a good football team, right? I mean, they're not even a good FCS team. Forget the fact that they're a 1-4 FCS team.
Is that all they are? Is 1-4?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah. They beat Maine the next. They lost to Stanford. Then the next week they beat Maine. Then they lost at Penn 25-14. Then they lost at Holy Cross 35-10. And then they lost to Cornell 34-10. Then they play Army this weekend. So they're about to be 1-5.
Oh man, it's not great. It's not great.
It's not good.
But it's going to be easier at this point for a Stanford team to kind of tap out, right? Like it's going to be that way, especially if you get up early for a team that loses steam down the stretch. Notre Dame needs one of these games, right? They've now gotten 2 straight weeks where they got good victories. One was a convincing victory over North Carolina. The other should have been a convincing victory over BYU, but you let them back. You let both teams back sort of into the football game, but you absolutely let BYU back into the football game. So this is a game where if Notre Dame plays their brand of football and they start fast and they start with urgency early on in this football game, you can bury this team. So I think that's the biggest thing, Brian, is not even just for Notre Dame's sake, but when you look at how Stanford has played football this season, because again, USC, they were playing tough early. Then you hit a point and it's just like you're done after that point. Oregon State, they got off to an early lead in Oregon State, and then you let them come back and you fizzle it at the end, right? Start out fast, and for a team that has not been a second-half team, has not been a team that can withstand adversity in ball games, put them in the adversity early and put your throat on the neck, as a lot of people would say in this chat.
Yeah, I mean, look, you look at Stanford last year, to back up the point, Ryan. They started well last year. I think they were 4-3-2 at one point in time. Then they had a somewhat tough loss to Arizona State, 28-10. They lost by 3 points to Washington State, lost by 7 to Washington, and then they just collapsed. Utah destroyed them, and then that was kind of the moment they just kind of stopped really being that team. And then Notre Dame didn't even play that great against Stanford last year, beat them 45-14.
Yep.
And just rolled them. So they're not a good football team, but they have talent. Yes. And that's the whole point. And the last thing you can do to a team like this is allow them to think, hey, we have a shot, to your point. And I think, and then also it's also about building momentum for the future, Ryan. Like you can't be a team that scores 6 points in the first quarter every 5 games. You can't. You've got to have that. You've got to figure out what are the buttons we're not pushing early that are going to result in us getting more early scores, right?
Right.
What is it? Now, part of it is Notre Dame goes at a slower pace. So a lot of times their second, they're deferring a lot, and so their second possession, a lot is happening in the second quarter. That's also a fact as well, but still not enough for you to only have 6 points in the first 5 games.
Right.
So I think that is going to be important. And then, as we mentioned yesterday, seeing the offensive line is got to be the vessel through which you do kind of have the no moss moment for Stanford. I mean, that's really what it's got to be about. It's one thing to hit some big plays in the pass game. That's important, but the true way to put a team away is just to beat them up physically. And this line has shown that it's better. Is it good enough to do that? I don't know. We're going to find out. We're going to find out. But I want to see that continued evolution of that unit as well.
I feel like, and I could be completely wrong about this, I'm trying to think back to the game so far, but I feel like Notre Dame offensively has had a lot of 3-and-outs to start football games this season. Am I wrong there? Because obviously they had a sustained drive against Ohio State. They got a field goal, right? Against Marshall, I want to say they went 3-and-outs, if I remember correctly. I'm trying to remember.
BYU, they went down. They were 3-and-out against North Carolina.
Yep.
They went 3-and-out against
Cal.
Yeah, because remember they had the drops.
Yep.
Marshall, I don't remember. I'm gonna look at that one now. I'm not saying you're wrong. I just truly don't remember.
Yeah. Well, I think
Notre Dame went 7 plays for 30 yards. Yes, now I remember.
Okay.
They came out their own 25. Buckner hit Lindsey on a hitch. Then they had a run for no gain. Then he hit 3rd and 5. He hit Styles, I think, on like a little slide route for 5 yards. Then he hit Styles, went for 16. I think was on a little like RPO. I believe he went for 16. Then incomplete to Jaden Thomas. Aldrich Estime run for -1, and 3rd and 11. Tyler Buckner ran for 5, and then they punted from the Marshall 45.
Gotcha.
But then they went down, turnover on downs the next drive, 9 plays, 28 yards, and then they were 3-and-out on their next drive. So even though they weren't 3-and-out, Ryan, they fizzled their first 3 drives. They really didn't threaten to score. I mean, their closest they got to threatening to score was getting the ball 4th and 4 to Marshall 31, and on 4th down, and you go for it, you don't get it.
Right.
So that's it backs up your point, even though technically it wasn't a 3-and-out. But yes. And honestly, I mean, you were a broken play. I mean, you had a busted play against Ohio State that went for 54 yards, and then you quickly went 3-and-out after that play and settled for a field goal.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, so it doesn't necessarily take away from your point.
I guess where I was going with it, Brian, is that the fast start for Notre Dame has to be an offensive fast start, right? And that's obviously what we're talking about now. But like defense, for the most part, has done their job in that department. There's, they gave up a touchdown, I think, on the first or second drive to North Carolina, right, if I remember correctly. But Ohio State, obviously, you held them on the first drive. And I'm just thinking about, offense, like where does this spark come from? Where does the early start come from? It has to come from the offense. It has to, because that's the part of the game, for the most part this season that hasn't been holding up their part of the bargain, right? But especially early on in games, they have not been a team that has come out of the gates and been sharp, been methodical. We need Notre Dame to have a really cohesive start to the offensive side of the football.
Well, I mean, you talk about the struggles that you talk about the defense giving up points. They gave up 6 points to BYU in the last game, but that was because the offense punted on a relatively short field, outkicked the coverage, and they had a long punt return to set up a score.
Yep.
North Carolina put a really long drive together, but Cal didn't score in the first quarter. Matter of fact, Cal didn't score until their fifth possession of that game. Cal didn't score until their 5th possession. They went 3-and-out, 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 missed field goal, touchdown. And so your defense did its job against Cal. Yep. You look at Marshall. Their first touchdown drive didn't come until their 3rd possession. They went 3-and-out their first drive. They went 6 plays for 19 yards and turned it over on downs on their 3rd drive. Then scored a touchdown on their 2nd drive. Then scored a touchdown on the 3rd drive. Then 3-and-out, 5 plays in a punt, and then a field goal. So they had 9 points at halftime. To your point, the defense isn't the reason that you're 3-2 right now.
Yep.
The offense is. And here's the thing that's key to this, Ryan. The fast start then benefits your defense. because I think one of the issues on defense right now is I believe there's an understanding of there's a very thin margin for error.
Yeah.
And I think that they understand that now. In the last couple of games, that hasn't necessarily been there. The offense has kind of come out and eventually started putting teams away. But if you can start building that confidence in your defense where you're, after the first couple possessions, you're up 14-0, all of a sudden the defense starts saying, hey, our offense came to play today, and it fires up the outside of the ball too. So there's just a lot of reasons why starting fast is important for Notre Dame. Point number 2. Notre Dame has a significant speed advantage against the Stanford defense, and they need to utilize it with their game plan and their execution. This manifests in a lot of ways, Ryan. The pre-snap movement in this game is the first area we talk about. I think that's got to be an important thing. I think you can do a lot of things formationally, motions and shifts, and then, even like little things like we saw last year, the little short motion with Braden Lindsey to get him off the press and then, run him on an inside post route, bam, touchdown, moving Kevin Austin in motion, then sending him on drags and overs, doing things where you're using your motion to get your guys free, because Stanford does have some size at corner. They can kind of beat you up off the line, do some things with movement pre-snap that then allow you to get post-snap, speed going, because running back and a receiver, Notre Dame has a significant speed advantage in this game. They need to utilize it. And it's a game plan thing. If the game plan is thinking about that and saying, hey, we can outspeed these guys, let's figure out ways to do it. I loved what Tommy Rees said yesterday. He's like, look, Braden Lindsey's been open a lot. He said it yesterday. He's like, we're just not getting him the ball. And I was glad he said it, because it's one of the biggest frustrations I have with a lot of fans who only watch games on television. They look at Braden's numbers like, he's not doing anything. Well, if you're at the game like we are, you see this kid is open a lot down the field. The quarterback's just not looking for him. Well, okay, then start doing more things as the offensive coordinator to get him in position where it's easier for the quarterback to see him. Do him on screens, jets, crossers, overs, where he's the primary, guy at that spot. Let him get a couple of those seam routes that right now are going to maybe some other guys, and let him catch and run. And so when you talk about using your speed, it's about using Chris Tyree, using Braden Lindsey, and using Lorenzo Styles to get them in some catch and run opportunities. If they can get those 3 kids in some catch and run opportunities and some well-designed schemes, then you're going to start seeing some of the big plays that this team has really not been able to consistently hit so far.
Yeah. I mean, I love the pre-snap movement as well, Brian, to your point, right? I call it maximizing release points. Like, there's some guys that you don't want on the line of scrimmage because against press, against physicality, they're not going to do as well. But there's a way to get guys free run into space, to manipulate that space, to manufacture that space. And I mean, even if Caillou Blue Kelly was playing a more significant role than he's probably going to end up playing, you still have a speed advantage, right? Like, he's a good corner, obviously. He's a really good player. But you still have, and we've talked about this back to the summer, you still have 4.4 flat-ish Braden Lindsey. You still have 4.4 something-ish Lorenzo Styles. You still have 4.3-ish Chris Tyree. There is so much speed on this Notre Dame offense that has not been maximized into this point. And especially in this football game, like, man, we've talked about Michael Mayer a lot, especially last week after the performance he had, right? But this could be another tight end game. It can be, because what's the second level of Stanford's defense is not too athletic after, outside of like a Tristan Sinclair if he plays a decent amount. It's like they just do not have speed on the second level. So you have speed differences at every single spot. Running back against linebackers, or even defensive backs if they want to put them out there against Chris Tyree in the passing game. Wide receivers against the cornerbacks. Tight ends against the linebackers. There are speed advantages everywhere on the field.
Yeah.
This is the game where you unlock some of that speed and you hit one, man. Like someone asked the other day, is this the game where Braden Lindsey has a couple big plays? It can be, and it should be, if we're being honest. Like, this is the game where he has a clear speed advantage. There's no doubt about it. Because Braden Lindsey has been open, against Ohio State that has this talented secondary, right, that has some speed on the back end. Against every team on the schedule, there's been opportunities. They just have not hit those big plays consistently. This is the game where you take advantage of the speed opportunities, whether it is the vertical stuff, if you can hit a couple of them, whether it is end arounds, jet sweeps, whatever. Use your speed advantage. Notre Dame has a clear advantage in that barometer of this game.
When you talk about Caillou Blue Kelly, he's a good football player. And he is. He's one of the better corners in the schedule. But do you know the team that had the third most yards against him last year and had the second most completions against him last year?
Was
It
it
was
Notre
Notre
Dame?
Dame.
Wow.
Tommy Reese went after him last year. And it was with a lot of those things where he was getting him because Caillou is a really fundamentally sound player. He's a technician. He's got some size. He's not a burner.
No.
He's closer to being like a Julian Love type than he is to being a Tariq Bracy type, right? A guy that's just like really fast, or Troy Pride, I think is what I meant to say instead of Tariq Bracy. He's more Julian Love than he is Tariq Bracy. Would you agree with that as a player?
Yeah.
What I loved about the game last year is Coach Reese had no fear of him last year because he's like, okay, that's fine. He's a really good player, but he's not as good as Kevin Austin. He's not as good as Braden Lindsey, and we're going to go after him. And he did. And especially now he's coming off of an injury, there's no reason to avoid him.
No.
Because again, as you said, now should you be going after him with comeback routes and a bunch of go routes and a bunch of stuff where it's about winning on the perimeter with just vertical stuff? No, not really. Maybe you can beat him on that off a play action or something. Maybe give him a double move. I'd like to see that. I'd love to see Braden Lindsey get used on a hitch and go instead of just running straight go routes. Do something where if you got a one-on-one, because the thing people have to understand is if you get in a situation where you've got a one-on-one to the field or the boundary and you don't really have safety help, you don't have to be as precise with your route. You can do more things in that instance. You can do double moves because you're just getting that ball out there. You're not working off anybody else. Like a lot of times you say, look, man, you can't do all the that stuff you do in one-on-ones at a camp because I'll say this. You'll see these kids at these summer camps and there's all these triple moves. I'm like, dude, you better hope you have the world's greatest offensive line on that particular route because you did 18 different moves to finally, I got open though. Yeah. After 9 seconds.
That's
right.
Man, that's like the Senior Bowl stuff where people go bananas for these one-on-one routes. Like I remember the kid that came out of UMass. What was his name a couple of years ago? The small white kid that was really fast, but he was running routes. Andy Isabella.
Yeah.
Andy Isabella was getting open all day in these one-on-ones because it took him like 6 seconds after doing 27 different moves. It's like, guys, that's not translatable to the football field. Just to your point.
They'll do all these moves, and it's like that, but you're working off other routes. You guys are running a high-low concept here. If you don't get to your mark, then you're blowing up the whole play. Or if you do this move to get this wide release, now you're running a vertical concept where your receiver's like this far apart because, hey, I won off the line. Yeah, you won off the line because you ran around the flipping guy. Right? So when you're in a one-on-one with a vertical shot outside, you don't have that. It's just like, dude, win. Yes. Right. And the coaches can help by doing a slant and go, by doing a hitch and go, by doing something like that. Or here's the thing, motion into a stack and then release a guy and then, do it that way or do a post snap switch or something like that. There's a lot of different things you can do to get cleaner releases for a player who's not a great, he's 185 pounds. He's not Braden Lindsey doesn't have elite functional strength as a wide receiver. That's not his game. So stop asking him to play that way. Same thing with Lorenzo Styles. It's like, look, there are some things you need to do to get him to catch the ball on the run. And then he's got to make the catch, obviously, like they did that against Cal. And they missed him once and then he dropped the other one, right? So it's not like they haven't done it. It's just you need to keep doing that and then do some of those things for Braden Lindsey because this is the game where it's got to happen, right? Yep. And so I think if Coach – and I think he said something a few weeks ago in a press conference when asked about Tobias Merriweather. He was like, I think, is he saying a press conference? I can't remember, but there was something he either said it or I had somebody tell me that's how he felt. I can't remember which one it was, but he talked about there's a really small margin for error right now in this offense. And 3 weeks ago, that was actually true. My whole thing is stop coaching scared, right? Like put your best guy out there and, just a difference of philosophy. But he was right. There was a small margin for error because of the players he was choosing to put on the field.
Sure.
With the way that
self-inflicted.
Correct.
Right.
With the way that the offense has played in recent weeks, I think it's obvious that the margin for error is wider now. With the way Drew's playing, with the way the offensive line is playing, especially the offensive line is playing, there's a wider margin for error. Where against Ohio State, you had a couple chances to hit shots and you got to hope, cross your fingers that the offensive line protects on that play, and they didn't. And so you missed on those opportunities. But your margin for error is a little wider now because you're playing better and the competition is not good.
Right.
I would argue this is probably the second worst defense they're going to play all year. I mean, all up to this point.
Yeah.
I would argue that Marshall has a better defense than Stanford. I would say that. I mean, even their loss last night, when Marshall's losing, they're not getting blown out because teams are just moving the ball up and down the field on them. They're losing because their offense is not that good, and it's never been that good. Notre Dame made it look a lot better than it actually is. Marshall right now is 3-3, Ryan. They're giving up 17 points a game.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they're not losing because of their defense. They lost to Troy 16-7. You know what I mean? So they lost last night 23-13. So the point is that this is not a good defense. This is a great opportunity for you to get your receivers involved in the game. You have to get your receivers going to where they can be a legitimate threat, and this is the game for that. The speed advantage they have in this game is clear. Mm-hmm. Take advantage of it, right? And so, yes, I need to see him run the football, establish the run, keep building on the run, but don't just – it's just like the game a couple weeks ago, Ryan, against North Carolina. Don't just play bully ball because you can.
Right.
And he didn't do that. He did a great job. I thought it was one of the better games he's ever called against North Carolina, especially when you consider it's your first year starting, or your starting quarterback's first road game. You're playing a high octane offense. I liked what I saw from him in that game. I want to see something else. I thought he was aggressive in that game. I thought he schemed the heck out of North Carolina's defense. I want to see that again against Stanford. And if he does that, I think this team puts up a ton of points. And Ryan, there's really only a couple more keys that are really easy. One is obviously big picture. You got to keep building momentum for this offense. This is a unit that's coming along, but it's not there yet. They beat up a really bad North Carolina defense and left a lot of points on the board. They did relatively well against a solid but relatively average BYU defense and didn't maximize their opportunities. Again, left points on the field. This is the game where you've got to take that next step, not leave points on the field, finish off drives, start fast, finish off drives, all that stuff. It not only works for this game, but it builds you some momentum for moving forward, and that's important. And then the fourth one is, here's how Stanford beats Notre Dame. They turn the ball over. Ugh. That's it. I mean, to me, that's it. Stanford's not going to out-talent or out-execute Notre Dame for 4 quarters. I think the only way they can win this game is if Notre Dame just turns it over. Just makes mistakes. And that's what cost Notre Dame against Marshall. And just turning the ball over, giving them short fields, giving them points off pick sixes. That's the stuff you got to avoid. And especially against a defense that is even worse. Well, I say even worse because they force more turnovers, but it's as bad as your defense is at forcing turnovers, but for different reasons. They just don't have playmakers. They've forced 2 turnovers all year.
Yep.
You can't turn the ball over. You got to play clean.
And I mean, you want to play clean every game, right? Like, you don't want to turn the ball over, but especially, and I look at this, Brian, it's like you need to run the football really well. You need to not turn the ball over at all if you're Notre Dame, or at least very, very limited in that regard, because it's what Stanford doesn't do well, right? Like, they don't force turnovers. They don't stop the run effectively. So this can't be their get-right game. We keep talking about it being a get-right game for Notre Dame. It also can't be a get-right game for Stanford's defensive woes. Like, that's the biggest thing. It's like, what they do bad, leave it there. Don't let them get better at something that they are very bad at this moment. Let a weakness stay a weakness. This is not the game where Stanford turns a weakness into a relative strength. This is not the game. If you are a efficient offense that creates some explosive plays and does not turn the football over, I would be very surprised if Notre Dame doesn't blow this team out of the water. That's just point blank to it. Like, I think that they are significantly more talented. Now, they've been significantly more talented than just about every team on the schedule outside of Ohio State, though, right? So You're sitting here at 3-2. You should be 4-1 if it's just based upon talent, right?
Right.
So we can't just use the Notre Dame's more talented than they are. Right. Sure, that's absolutely right. But Notre Dame needs to play good football. Like, they need to play good, efficient football and not shoot themselves in the foot. I said it last week, right? You're going to be playing a good BYU team last week. You're playing a Stanford team that is struggling. Do not also play against Notre Dame in this game. Mm-hmm. Keep it Notre Dame versus Stanford. It can't be Notre Dame versus Notre Dame and Stanford, right? Do not be your worst enemy. Yep. Do not shoot yourselves in the foot, and you will come out with a big victory. That's what I think in this game.
Absolutely. We're going to go to the defensive keys next, Ryan, but I want to
Mhm.
remind people we will have a mailbag at the end of this. If you want to have them, if you all want to have a mailbag, because mailbag's dependent on people giving us questions. So if you have some questions you want to throw in there, you can start doing that now. And obviously, super chats we'll definitely get to. But if you want to throw any other questions in there, we'll get to those after the show is this portion of the show is complete. Ryan, defensively, I look at this matchup, and this is the side that is a little bit closer in, from a standpoint of they can do damage to you at times, even if you're playing well. I mean, they just have – this is the side where they have good enough players. You have an NFL arm at talent. Now, is Tanner McKee an NFL quarterback? We're going to find that out over the next couple of years. I think there was a little bit too much, as we talked there's a little bit too much hype put on him after one okay year.
Yep.
But there's no disputing he has an NFL arm.
Sure.
But there's a lot of guys that were NFL arms that weren't very good quarterbacks.
Right.
I don't think that's Tanner McKee. I think he's got a lot of talent. I think people just need to pump the brakes and let the kid develop. He went on a mission. He's like, this is the second year back from that. Let's let the kid develop a little bit. But when he's on and he gets a clean pocket, he can hurt you. There are throws he can make in this game where it's like, you can't, there's nothing, you just got to just deal with it. Don't let the guy score. He's made throws like that in every game they've played so far. Did you see it was the first big play they hit against Washington. Washington guy was in decent coverage, but he just throws a rope right over top of him to Michael Wilson for a big gain. It's just like, okay, yeah, there's not a lot. Do a better job with the press and the transition and all that. But when a kid throws the ball like that, there's not a lot you can do. And that's like the first clean pocket he had all game. It was like second quarter, right? That's going to be a key, So receiver-wise, Michael Wilson, when healthy, is a good football player.
100%.
The way they're using Elijah Higgins is really smart. He's a weapon. Ben Urisek's a really good football player. There are some guys. Bryson Tremaine is he's not a great receiver, but he's big and he knows it, and they can use it. So, there's guys that can hurt you if no matter what. I mean, you could defend it perfectly and they're going to hit a couple plays. I get that. They've done that every game, Ryan. They did that against USC. They did that against Washington. They did that against Oregon. They did that against Oregon State. So they're going to hit their plays. You're probably not going to shut them out, right? That would be a shock. They're going to score a little bit, at least a little bit. So the cleaner you play, the better chance you have at this being a blowout. But this is the side of the ball where if you're making mistakes, they can hurt you even more. And when we talked about turnovers being a key for the Notre Dame offense, it's because you don't want to give this offense more chances on short fields because they can hurt you. So with that in mind, there are, to me, 4 keys to victory in this game, Ryan. And the first one is a similar theme. You've used it almost every week so far because it's really important when you're playing a passing football team that's not great at running the football, or a passing football team that is running the football. It's key no matter what. And the first one is, Ryan, they got to shut down the run game. First and foremost, make Stanford play with one hand.
Well, my same point that I used on the offensive side of the ball, Brian, I'm going to use on the defensive side of the ball, right? It is a weakness for Stanford right now running the football. Since E.J. Smith has gotten hurt, it has been very bad. I mean, what was it, 101 yards a game right about since E.J. Smith has gotten injured? Last year, it's pretty mirror image to what they're doing since E.J. Smith went down with the injury. So Stanford's not a good running football team. Their offensive line has not been playing very well, and they don't have a game-breaking weapon in the backfield at running back right now. They have just a couple solid backs. So if you're Notre Dame, don't let this be the game where weakness becomes a strength. Like, it's very easy, man. Like, if this is a game where you keep Stanford what they typically have been doing as a running football team and you make them one-dimensional and make Tanner McKee try to beat you, you feel good about it, right? You feel good about it.
Even more so than the last 3 big-time quarterbacks they've played, Ryan, because he can't move.
Yes.
And that's why it makes it even more important in this game.
No, you're 100% right. Because, I mean, Drake May is going to make some plays just off of being a good athlete and being as good a quarterback as he is, right? Like, to your point. Jaron Hall is going to make a couple plays because he's a good improviser and can work outside the pocket. So it's a fantastic point by you.
And I would argue that the 4 of the 5 best throws that C.J. Stroud had against Notre Dame were out of the pocket.
Fade into the left, out of the pocket.
With the exception of the touchdown pass to in the post over the middle, outside of that, the biggest plays he made in that game were out of the pocket.
Yep.
Tanner McKee's not beating you out of the pocket.
No, and he's especially not beating you. Well, let me rephrase. It makes him less and less comfortable he's playing with a team that cannot run the football, because that's where he becomes the biggest weapon off of play action, right? Like those are the moments where it's like, this kid can throw the football, man. He's got a good vertical arm. He can push the ball down the football field. That is accentuated by the ability to run the football. When it's not, Isaiah Foskey, Riley Mills, Jason Amolola, and everyone else on the defensive line, you always hear the expression like pin your ears back, take the shackles off and go. That's when you have the opportunity to do it, man. When you know there's not a running threat, when you know you're going to get them into third and long situations, 3rd and 8s, 3rd and 10s, 3rd and 12s, whatever it can be, you know that there's no run threat anymore, right? So get them into those situations, make them uncomfortable, and affect the quarterback in the pocket. This offensive line is not very good, and they're already down two of their better offensive linemen in this football game. You have a quarterback that is not very mobile. Make this a passing game. Don't let the running attack get going in this one, because it has not been a strength for Stanford for the last couple years. Do not allow it to be a strength for this team on Saturday.
Yeah. I mean, you've got to dominate it. I mean, because to your point, Ryan, is if you're dominating the run game with your front and your mic, and then what I'm elaborating on the point Ryan made, because now your safeties don't have to start peeking when they're doing that slow mesh. Right. They don't have to worry about dragging that out. Like, oh, okay, what do I do? No, my guys got that. I'm playing cleanup if I see the back declared, but right now I'm playing this. I'm playing this outside. You know, it's like Stanford's version of RPOs. You know what I mean? Like it actually is RPOs. It's like, it may look like play action. Some of them are play action, but some of them are RPOs. He's going to ride that sucker. And as soon as you commit, he's pulling it and throwing that post with that deep end behind it, right? They're going to do that. And he's got the arm to execute those plays. If you're dominating the run game, then fine. I mean, try and run it, you know, because we want you to hand the ball off. We don't want you to pull it and throw it. So go ahead. Go ahead and throw it, because you're going to hand it off to him, and then our Mike's going to come and clean it up, or our 3 technique's going to smash somebody and blow it up, or we're going to set the edge. And, I mean, that's what you want him to do. What you can't allow to happen is your safeties have to be factors in the run game, because your box isn't getting the job done, and now all of a sudden he's banging some plays behind you, because I don't think Stanford is good enough to consistently move up and down the field on Notre Dame.
I agree.
Neither team that beat Notre Dame was good enough to do that. Ohio State wasn't good enough to do that. They scored 3 touchdowns in that game, right? They missed a field goal. Maximum would have had 24 points. Marshall wasn't good enough to consistently do that. One of their touchdowns came off of the Notre Dame offense. I mean, really, you've had one opponent score more than 21 points on the defense alone. And what I mean by that is, so BYU scored, well, even I don't even have to make caveats. You've only had one team score in the 20s on the defense. Marshall only scored 19 points, period, on the defense. Their 26 points came because of an offensive touchdown, or like a defensive touchdown. Then Cal only scored 17 points, and then BYU. Right. So the only team that's really done anything like that came down to, it was North Carolina scoring some garbage touchdowns late. It was 38-14. Game was basically over. Right. And so this is a team, in my opinion, Ryan, that, you know, when they've gotten in trouble, it's because of the run game struggling, and then you're able to make some big plays down the field.
Yep.
Right. And so if you can shut the run game down, play clean football. The point I was making is no team has gone up and down the field on them consistently. North Carolina's points were off big plays. North Carolina had one long scoring drive in that game, meaning like a methodical 6 to 8 play drive at one. That was the opening drive. And that was the point I was making. BYU's first touchdown came off of a punt. Yes. You know, they put one touchdown drive together, because their other touchdown came off of a 53-yard pass. Right. So that's the point, is teams just aren't consistently moving the ball up and down the field on Notre Dame. And so you've got to be able to limit those big plays. And you do that by making them one-dimensional. And then part of this leads into part 2. Part of making them one-dimensional is you're dominating with the box. Because if you're dominating the run game with the box, it's an easy transition to pressuring the quarterback. We saw that against North Carolina. Notre Dame did a great job of dominating the North Carolina ground attack with the box. They weren't blitzing safeties. They weren't blitzing 6 guys. They were bringing 1 backer and their 4 D linemen, and they blew up the run game, which then naturally transitions into, if you're getting a great push against the run, then you're also getting a great push against the pass, and that's how you impact the quarterback. Because as you made the point yesterday, and I went and rewatched the game again last night, and just the way that Washington just ate Stanford up, like just with their pass rush. I mean, there was no chance for Tanner McKee to keep them in that game. None. And not because of Tanner McKee, just because, I mean, like, this isn't a knock on Drew Pine or saying I would like it to happen. I'm just making a point. If Tanner McKee was playing behind the offensive lines and had at the time that Drew Pine's got the last 2 games, his numbers would be tremendous right now.
Mm-hmm.
He'd be putting up 350, 360. I mean, he'd be putting up big-time numbers if he had that kind of time, Ryan, because, I mean, he's putting up good numbers now, and he's just constantly getting harassed. Yep. Constantly. And you've got to make sure that continues.
Brian, I mean, Washington is the blueprint, right? You want to talk about getting pressure with minimal numbers, right? Like, they're rushing 4 all day, man. Like, they're not bringing 5. They're not bringing 6. Washington was just like, hey, Braylon Trice, Jeremiah Martin, Zion, ZTF, however you pronounce his last name, like, their dudes are just better than our dudes, right? I mean, our dudes are just better than your dudes. Like, that's what they said against Stanford. And Stanford even had Walter Rouse in that game who was playing, and he was getting absolutely just – they were taking his lunch money, right? And that's the formula, right? It's not going to look the same because Notre Dame is a different football team who wins in different ways, but you have to be able to win your one-on-ones up front, man. Like, you have to be able to dominate. I mean, that's what Washington did against Stanford, man. Like, Tanner McKee had no time. And even when he had time, he was still getting pressured. Like, that is the formula. Washington showed it. And honestly, Notre Dame's defensive line is as talented as Washington's is. It is. Isaiah Foskey's better than – I like Braylon Trice a lot. I think he's a really good football player. Isaiah Foskey's better, though. He's a better football player, just flat out. So if Washington can do that against that offensive line for Stanford, Notre Dame there's no reason that Notre Dame can't do the same. Minimal numbers, attack, be physical, dominate the line of scrimmage. That is the recipe for success for Notre Dame every single game. But in this game especially, when you're looking at both fronts for Stanford, Notre Dame has a clear advantage on both sides of the ball, and they have to make it that way. That is the key.
My expression there, Ryan, was not disagreeing with what you were saying. It just was remembering about how close Notre Dame was to getting Braylon Trice out of Arizona. They really wanted him. They wanted him and Foskey in the same class, and he picked Washington instead. That's why Jimmy Lake hurt Notre Dame a lot during his tenure, taking away guys they wanted. He took away Kyler Gordon, who Notre Dame Mike Elko loved Kyler Gordon. He wanted him so bad. They wanted Braylon Trice, Asa Turner. Now, Asa Turner hasn't panned out, but Kyler Gordon was really good. And Braylon Trice has been really good this year for them so far. So, what's he played? 6 games. He's got seven tackles for loss, 4.5 sacks. And 2 of them came against Stanford. So he's a really good football player.
He's been very disruptive this year, man. Yep. Very disruptive. He's up to like 6'4", 270 as well. He's a big kid. Yep.
Ryan, the next key to me is you've got to win on the outside. Mm-hmm. And the first place we mean this is in the pass game. Right. You cannot look. Stanford will hit. They're going to hit a couple throws on the perimeter. They will. Sure. They're going to win a couple jump balls, but I like the way you explained it to me about it. So like to me, but just you explain what it means and then what the success needs to look like. But when we first talk about winning on the outside, it's the corner matchups against the receiver matchups on the perimeter.
Yeah. So I think that for me, when you have the type of size that Stanford has, right? 6'3", 234 Elijah Higgins, 6'5", John Humphreys, 6'4", Bryson Tremaine, 6'2", 210, Michael Wilson. Like, there's a lot of size, obviously, and they have the ability to win at the catch point, win in the air. And you usually hear the phrase 50-50 balls, right? So that's, 50% of the time, wide receivers are going to come down for it. I don't like that moniker because I think that it's actually much more in the offense's favor, especially with how the game's played today. I would say they're more 70-30, 80-20 balls, right? Like, more often than not, if you put it in the right spot, Elijah Higgins is probably going to beat a 5'11", 6-foot corner for the football, right? In this game, though, you have to make it 50-50, right? Because to your point, Brian, they're going to make some plays, man. They're not bad football players, right? And they have size. They have strong hands. They have leaping ability. They're going to make some plays on you. But if you make it closer to 50-50 where Notre Dame's able to counteract and limit their impact in those regards, because I do think that if Notre Dame gets a decent amount of pressure on them, Tanner McKee's going to have to let that ball go early. And if you're letting that ball go early, that says like, hey, he's probably just putting it up in a general spot and letting a guy trying to go get the football. So limit the impact. Make it a more 50-50 contested catch or better. I mean, if you make it better, then you're going to blow this team out because that is where they have the clear advantage, not clear advantage from a talent perspective, but clear advantage from a length perspective, from a size perspective. Their wide receivers are always going to be bigger than Notre Dame's cornerbacks. Can't change that, right? But what you can change is the results. And if your process is good, if you play through the hands, you play physical, you're competitive, if you can keep it to 50-50 or better in Notre Dame's favor, then they're going to have a hard time they're going to have a hard time moving the football because that is where their advantage is. It's what
that's been their offense all year. I mean, well, let me rephrase. Since E.J. Smith went out, that's been their offense. That's been their only offense. To me, there's 4 ways to stop this from being a 70-30 proposition. Number 1, the pass rush. So we talked about. Yes. Now, that doesn't mean sacking them. It can also mean it's like they didn't sack Jaren Hall the first play of the game. What was Stanford what was BYU trying to do in the first play of the game? Hey, we see a 5'10" corner out there against our 6'+ corner or receiver, and so we're just going to drop back, take a shot. And Tariq did a nice job of getting leverage, and he, but the reason that ball floated is the pass rush, right? It's a lot harder to be accurate when you're got a guy in your face, right? I mean, and that's not a knock on. I mean, that's true for any quarterback. I mean, that's not just true for Jaren Hall, or I mean, that's true for everybody. That's true for all quarterbacks. And so, to me, when you're able to get pressure on a guy, that's kind of that's where you can have some success. That's number 1. Pressure is number 1. Number 2. There has to be a level of physicality. And a lot of people view physicality as like just jamming them at the line. That's not really – I mean, that's it. If that's your thing, Notre Dame doesn't have any great jam guys, right? They don't have any guys that are just great at that. Physicality, to me, I would rather have a guy who is physical through the transition than a guy who's physical with his initial punch and then doesn't finish through the transition. And that's what happened to Washington a couple times they got beat is they gave a really nice attempt at a jam, but then as soon as the transition happened, they lost them. We talked about that yesterday, being able to look, being able to kind of, just as you look back for the ball, just you got to feel it out. You got to stick. You got to be kind of stay engaged through the look back, right? And the same thing here is like you got to be physical through the transition when you're going. Don't lose them. Keep a hand on him because then it makes it harder for him to, number 1, be in position. You can get that guy close to the sideline where he catches that ball on you, but he steps out of bounds. Right. Because you're not letting them get clean. And yes, the press can do that, but make them go wide with their alignment by being more up in your coverage, which is what I like about playing maybe more cover 2 type of looks, even if you're going to rotate out of it, but playing more cover 2 type of looks, make them go width to get around you, number 1. But then if you're also physical through the transition, you leave them a very, very small window to actually get in bounds because the key isn't always breaking up the pass, Ryan. The key is, he caught it on you, but he caught it out of bounds. Right. And so that's the key. So number 1, the physicality. The other part of this that's very important is leverage. And I think what you can't do is you can't get ahead of the receivers. Right? If Tanner McKee's going to beat you because he dropped 15 dimes over the top, 40 yards down the field that you couldn't defend, okay, more power to you, kid. What you don't want to let him do is get easy 20-yard gains because you get too far ahead with your leverage, and then you let him just complete those easy back shoulders. What you can't do is if he's going to beat you on 50-50 balls, it has to be over your head, up and over your head. That's a much lower completion rate pass than a back shoulder where he's able to actually turn his hips and you're out in front because you've lost leverage. So I think leverage for corners is very important, especially if you're also able to be physical through the transition. And then the final piece is finish. Yeah. And this is especially true for Cam Hart and Benjamin Morrison who have a little bit more length, right? As they're bringing that ball down, punch through it. Yes. Yep. And you may only knock a couple out, but if you can knock a couple out there, but then force a couple incompletions because you had good leverage, force a couple incompletions because the guy didn't have enough room in bounds, and then you're going to force a couple completions, some incompletions because of the pressure, all of a sudden you just start adding up all those incompletions and the efficiency is gone. And that's the key, right? Yep. And so those are the 4 keys to me to winning on the outside. from a defensive standpoint. And then, of course, you could add in, like, there's times where you have help over the top. Those are all important things.
Sure.
But just as far as just when you're talking about the cornerback and the defense as a whole having pressure without having to scheme it is kind of where you go. Yep. So the last one, Ryan, get the ball. This is a team that turns the ball over a lot. Notre Dame's got to have a breakout game, and where they just get the ball and they got to have it. They've got to have it.
I like your philosophy on maybe a more cover 2 looks this week, Brian, because I'm a big fan of playing zone coverage against a team that has shown a proclivity to turning the football over, right? Let's get our eyes back to the line of scrimmage, back to the quarterback, and let him make mistakes, man. Like, at the end of the day, this Stanford team has shown that when pressured, they will make some mistakes. Tanner McKee is going to make some throws on Saturday. You're just going to go like, wow, man, that's like an NFL level quarterback, to your point, right? Mm-hmm. The kid has a great arm. But then he's going to make some decisions that you're going to go, oh, doesn't handle pressure very well, right? And when those things happen, things tend to go south pretty quickly. So if you're going to mix in more zone, perfect. You're going to play some man, perfect. That works. I want it to be a multiple kind of look from a coverage perspective, but playing a little bit more zone this week, I think, can give you a big opportunity to create some turnovers. Because I think most people they think, oh, those man-to-man cover guys are the ones that get interceptions. That's not really the case usually. Usually the guys that get a lot of interceptions are the zone-heavy players that have good vision the whole time. They can see where the football is going. They can see the route concepts that are breaking in front of them. They can see what a quarterback is trying to do against them. So having that good eye discipline, that good eye manipulation to their advantage, I think Notre Dame's got a big opportunity to create a couple big plays in the pass game especially, but just overall, man, it's not been great for Notre Dame so far forcing turnovers. Let Stanford do what they do bad, what they do poorly, man. They are not a very efficient offense with not turning the football over. They'll turn the ball over, force them into those bad mistakes. Pressure, good eyes.
Last one, special teams, and we saw exactly what we're talking about last week.
Yep.
Don't give up cheap points. Don't be the reason you give up cheap points. We talk a lot about the mistakes of the defense and the missed opportunities by the offense, but the reality is BYU's first touchdown came off of a bad punt return coverage, and you've got to do a better job there. Lorenzo Styles got to do a better job getting off the block, right? You've got to have better discipline. You can't outkick the coverage. If you're going to kick at 65 yards, you better kick it high in 65 yards. Not a line drive where a guy catches it and there's not anybody within 15, 20 yards of him. That's not good, right? Oh, great leg. Yeah, okay, that great leg just cost you 50 yards.
He's trying to break the Notre Dame average record, okay? Yeah. He's trying to break it.
Yeah, that's fine. Break the Notre Dame, what's the
gross net punts?
Yes, net punt, right? The net punt. Yes. Set the net punt record. That's what I care more about, right?
Yeah.
And that's something Jay Bramlett was pretty good at. Jay didn't have a great leg, but at Notre Dame, and he when he was consistent, you just didn't get a lot of returns on Jay Bramlett. That was the thing, is because you just get it high and it'd be like a 41-yard punt, but the net was 41 too, because they were fair catching it. And that's something that John Sott's been very good this year. There's just been a couple times where it's like, hey man, like, get a little bit more air on that sucker. Lose 10 yards of distance because you got more hang time. And that's going to be a key.
I feel like Tyler Newsome was really good at that, wasn't it? I feel like his net average
his net average was good because they had great coverage.
Yeah.
And he kicked that sucker super high, but he would also just kick one where not only would he outkick the coverage, he'd outkick the returner. That's the difference between what John Sott and Tyler Newsome is. John is way more consistent than Tyler, but Tyler had a bazooka for a leg.
Yeah.
But the reason he hasn't really been able to stick in the NFL is because he had a very inconsistent leg. Where like sometimes he'd kick a 65-yard line drive that you can return. The other time he'd kick it 65 yards and it just would go over your head and then just roll for like a 75-yard punt. And it's like, okay, that's a great job, right? So, but when Tyler Newsome was right, he could kick it 50, 55 yards with great hang time. Yeah. And you just get down there and, it helps with your net punt average, but he was just really inconsistent. Like the Clemson game in 2015, just backed up, kicks it out, goes like 10 yards, and they get the ball at the 25-yard line going in. He just would have – and then the next time he'd kick it, it'd go like 80 yards. It was really inconsistent. But I liked Tyler Newsome because he was a tough kid. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like
Yep.
he was a tough. I mean, he'd go down and make a tackle. He worked hard. He was
a pretty good athlete for a punter, man. He was a pretty good athlete.
He was. But you just got to play clean on special teams in this game. It goes back to kind of what we said in the last point on offense is don't make mistakes that make mistakes that let an inferior opponent stay in the game or possibly pull off an upset.
Right.
That's the key. You can't do that. You can't do that.
Yep. Don't shoot yourselves in the foot, man. That's what happened last week, to your point, right, Brian? Like, you gave up that punt return, and Notre Dame's defense even played tough after that, man. Like, you didn't score until a 4th and goal, right? So, I mean, yeah,
questionable 4th and goal.
Yes.
Or maybe might have been able to throw some flags on that play on the offense. Yes. Let's be honest.
Yep.
So, Ryan, obviously that's the keys to victory for Notre Dame. This is a game that Notre Dame should win. This is a game Notre Dame should win comfortably, but it's also a game where, they just have to play clean. I just want to see a 4-quarter game. I do. And for me, a 4-quarter game is what you do to the moment you take your starters out. I mean, it's because sometimes they didn't play a 4-quarter game. Yeah, it kind of did. I mean, the 4th quarter was with the backups. They got to score on the backups. Like, I don't really count that, but like, I just, that didn't happen against North Carolina. The mistakes were happening to the starters. They couldn't get to the backups because of what the starters were doing. So you want to avoid those type of things. We're going to have a mailbag next. It's probably not going to be a long one because we don't have a lot of questions. But before we get to the mailbag, Ryan, I just want to remind people that we have a 6:00 show tonight. IB Nation Sports Talk will be tonight. You and I will be back tomorrow for our prediction show. We'll talk Notre Dame and Stanford. And Ladarius keeps coming into the chat, wanting to talk about Alabama all the time because he's an Alabama fan. Well, tomorrow, Ladarius, I promise you, we're going to spend some time talking about Alabama.
I'm going to be sick tomorrow.
Yeah. We're going to talk about Alabama, Tennessee, Michigan, Penn State. And there's so many great games this weekend, right? Oklahoma State, TCU, ton of great games that we're going to discuss tomorrow as well. So we're going to have a lot of that. Saturday, 10 to noon, Vince and Sean are going to have the IB Nation's IB countdown to kickoff from 10 to noon. And then, of course, at 3:30, we're going to go live for a very, very special edition of the Irish Breakdown podcast. We are going to want as many people that are at the game, tailgating in town, whatever the case may be. You're going to be there. We're going to be over by the administration building, which is the Golden Dome. So you're going to want to come find us. We won't be that hard to find. Because you're going to want to be there for the special announcement that we have planned for Saturday. So I've almost slipped up on it like 4 times in the last couple of days. So I got to be very, very careful. So you're going to want to check all that stuff out. And, of course, hit the like button, hit the subscribe, hit the notification bell, share the podcast. Also want to give a heads up to people. We have officially removed PayPal from all of our platforms. If you are currently a PayPal member, please reach out to me. I'm going to email everybody that's a PayPal member soon because we are going to eventually transition completely away from PayPal. So if you're paying through PayPal now, it's fine for now, but by no later than the end of the year, I'd like to kind of get it sooner done as we will be completely removed from PayPal for just a lot of different reasons. So just want to give everybody heads up on that. So if you get an email from me saying about this, it's not the first time you've heard about it. So I just wanted to let folks know about that as well. So Ryan, mailbag is going to come next. But if you're listening via podcast platform, before you go over to the mailbag show, give us a 5-star review. We would greatly appreciate it. And we had a bunch of new videos up today on the CFB Nation channel. The guys did a great job breaking down. They talked about Matt Rule possibly coming back to college, his fits. Talked about UCLA, Dorian Thompson-Robinson being a Heisman candidate, which I know Ryan doesn't want to hear. But the fact is, so far, the results are what they are, whatever you think about a kid. Talked about Texas. Can Quinn Ewers and Arch Manning kind of be the final thing that kind of puts Texas over the top? And Texas is back. We'll see. Still a lot to prove, but some good signs lately. Just a lot of great stuff you're going to want to check out. So that's CFB Nation on YouTube. You can also subscribe to the CFB Nation channel via podcast, which we would greatly appreciate as well, and help continue to grow us there. So that'll be it for this edition of the Irish Breakdown podcast. So Ryan, let's dive into the mailbag. We don't have a lot of questions today, so if you guys want to have a mailbag that's longer than 5 minutes, get some questions in right now, and we'll get those to you. But we do have a few questions here. The first one is from Beefeater. He says, Brian and Ryan, I'm actually let you address this one because I think I spoke on this a little bit, but I want to get your thoughts on this because I've answered it, but I don't know if you've answered it at this point yet. But he says, Brian, do you think that Maris Lufau is a little tentative after his injury?
I don't know if tentative is the right word, Toe Jam. Like, I would say this, right? Linebacker, I think people underrate just how cerebral of a position playing linebacker is, right? Like, I always talk so much about eye discipline and trigger and understanding what's like there is a instinctive nature to playing the linebacker position. So honestly, I think just missing out on the full year last year, I think it just cost Maris a lot of reps. Like we saw a kid in 2020 that didn't play with great vision. He was just kind of running around with his hair on fire, which was awesome because he's 6'2" and some change, 235 pounds with good length and athleticism. But I think right now, man, he's just not seeing the game clearly. I don't think that because I've seen plays where when he sees it and he trusts it and he runs to it, I'm like, the dude's moving, man. Like he's not like it's not like a deficiency from an athleticism perspective. I just really think that the whole year off has hurt him as far as just getting live reps, seeing those live bullets and seeing the game at a clearer level. Like there's just, and I also don't think that it's helped. I don't think it's helped him at all that the other linebackers around him haven't been playing very well either. So like, there's not like I don't call it collaborative, but like there's no feel working off of one another right now. It's been very sporadic in that regard. So I just think it's a inconsistency level from a eye discipline perspective. I don't think he's trusting what he sees. And I don't think that he's being proactive with his approach to the game. I still think he's a good athlete. I still think he has a lot of good traits that I would love to work with. But right now, I just don't think Maris Lufau is seeing the game very well.
And I think that's compounded by the fact that they are putting so much on the linebackers. Yes. It's a bad combination. It's a really bad combination. I mean, he is a significantly worse player than he was in 2020. Significantly worse. Mm-hmm. That's not a talent problem. Maybe injury is cost him a little bit of a touch of speed, maybe, but the injury is not why he's playing the way that he's playing. I think he's tentative because, like you said, Ryan, it's up here.
He's not a step slow. He's completely out of position because he's reading it like poorly. Like that's where it's like the biggest indicator for me, right? If he read a play perfectly and he's working the perimeter, you're just like, he just doesn't have quite enough juice to make a play. That's completely different than it being a B gap run backside and you're in the B gap on the front side. Like it's just, that's the different levels. Like he's just not seeing the game right now.
Yeah. Next question is from Ian Johnston. Ian says, whose O-line is better, Notre Dame 2021 or Stanford this year? I'll say this because Ryan looks like you're thinking about it. I'll say this. I think Stanford's offensive line this year is better through 5 games than what Notre Dame's offensive line last year was better through 5 games.
That's fair. That's fair.
Notre Dame's offensive line played much better down the stretch. And Stanford's not close to that. I will also say this. I think Stanford's just God-given ability of their offensive line through 5 games in the season is definitely better than last year's Notre Dame offensive line of who they had on the field. Because remember, you had Blake Fisher was hurt, right? Joe Walt was injured. And, the rest of the guys were just really struggling. You had Kane Madden on the field. It was a rough start to the year. But I would say Stanford by this much. And I would say Stanford at least has a couple good run blocking games under their belt. And I think their success in the run game would be even better if E.J. Smith wasn't hurt. Not a lot better, but better. Yes. Where Notre Dame was abysmal running the football. I mean, even in the games where the offense played well, like Florida State, Notre Dame still couldn't run the football. They only scored points because Jack Cohn was just shredding people in that game.
To your point, Brian, especially early on in the season last year, if Walter Rouse and Miles Hinton are both healthy and John Hornibrook's playing, I would probably take that unit over the early version. If you're giving me the version of the last game of the season where Fisher and Alt are both playing, then I would defer to Notre Dame in that instance. But I
still wouldn't because that team could not run the football. Like they run. They could not run at. What Stanford has done in the last 3 games rushing the football is still better than what Notre Dame did in the bowl game last year. Now again, quality of the competition was pretty good. I get that.
Sure,
but like they couldn't do little things. 42 yards on 21 carries. That just. Now what that unit was better at was pass pro, right? That was a very good pass pro team. They also had a month to prepare for that game.
Sure.
Or Stanford doesn't have a month to prepare for USC and Washington and Oregon and that. So, I mean, I don't necessarily say you're wrong, Ryan. I mean, I think it's a valid point. I just personally I think Stanford also just flat out gets beat sometimes because their technique stinks. They don't have just a blown assignments like Notre Dame had a lot of last year. So, again, if I'm taking the Notre Dame offensive line down the stretch, it's definitely better than what this unit has been so far. And I don't think they're poised to have the like kind of emergence that Notre Dame did last year because of the injuries. So I don't see them having a Notre Dame type second half jump.
No, it's going to get worse. It's not going to get better. Yeah, to your point.
Yeah, agree. And you look at their schedule. You got Notre Dame this week, Stanford next week. They have Arizona State. Then they play at UCLA, home against Washington State, at Utah, at Cal, home against BYU. There's a lot of good defenses left on the schedule.
Yep.
A lot of good defenses left on the schedule. It's not, like you said, it's not going to get better. So if we're just looking at a 5-game window, I'd probably take Stanford. But Ryan, I mean, you got to think about what the 5-game window was for Notre Dame last year. It was Florida State, Toledo, Purdue, Wisconsin, Cincinnati. We were coming off the Cincinnati game where the Notre Dame offensive line just got destroyed.
Yep.
So that's kind of where my mind is on that. But by 3 games later, the tune started to change a little bit as the competition got worse.
That's a good point.
Here's one for you, Ryan, Mr. Linebacker. David Lowe asks, what is the difference between a Mike and Will?
So middle linebacker is to the strong side and Will linebacker is to the weak side. Will linebacker is the weak side inside linebacker. Mike linebacker is to the strong side. So if you're in a 4-2-5 alignment, for instance, David, if it's strong left and the Mike is going to be the left inside linebacker, the Will is going to be the weak inside linebacker. The stylistic differences are that the Mike is usually your bigger player who is more dependent upon the run because he's playing to the front side of the strength. So he's going to be more of a downhill player. Your Will is going to be playing a lot in pursuit. So they're the guys that are usually a little bit more twitchy, a little more athletic, and they need to work and cover a little bit more space than a Mike is. But the easy difference is Mike is to the strong side, Will is to the weak side.
There's some responsibility differences as well. Yeah. The Will have to play outside the box at times.
Yep.
And depending on how you play, the Will actually can get run at a lot more than maybe.
Especially with inside zone being such a big thing now.
Yeah.
Yep.
Because teams will run to the boundary a lot more than they used to, especially in college football. In the NFL, you don't see it as much because it's with the way the hash marks are, Ryan, there really isn't a boundary when it comes to the run game. Still is one in the pass game. I mean, there's still a short side, but it doesn't really impact the run game as much. And college football teams still tend to be a little bit more boundary-oriented with the run game. And then, as you said, some of the field stuff that they'll do with inside zone is meant to cut back. Even outside zone is meant to cut back where the Will's got to be a major player to that, which is people say, why is the Will position nowadays the one that ends? It used to be your Mike linebacker led your team in tackles. You're not seeing that nearly as much anymore. And a lot of that is because of what we just talked about, but also the Will has so much more pass game responsibilities that add to that production as well. So it's the
Will's also, I mean, in a lot of instances when we're talking about the RPO game and stuff, that's the guy that they're going to try to prove wrong, right? Is the Will linebacker or the Sam linebacker, depending on how you're reading that guy. So, I mean, Will has turned into the playmaking position at linebacker. Like that's the position that will make tackles for loss in pursuit. We'll play a little bit in pass coverage. We'll play stuff in space. Like that's why the Mike position has been devalued a little bit, right? Just a little bit at the next level. Like it's just not the playmaking position that it once was. And that's also why, to this conversation, right, Brian? The Sam linebacker on the NFL level is almost becoming extinct. Like no one talks about that, but every team now, I think there was one team last year that played base defense more than 50% of the time. The nickel has now become base. Like that is what's happening. So what you're doing is you're taking a Sam off the field, you're putting a nickel in there. So the Sam linebacker is becoming a very small part of a defense now. So that's why you're seeing a lot of Sam linebackers like trying to transition to defensive ends at the next level and be pass rushers because your value is just less than it ever has been. Like you want to be a Will, Mike, Sams are just almost becoming an obsolete position at this point.
Absolutely. Well, here we go. Sorry, I'll get to this one from This is the kind of the point I made yesterday, Ryan. I don't think they care because
Right.
I think the way they look at it is, look, we are not getting in trouble. We're making our money, and he runs a clean program. And he's a guy that, from what I've heard, most people really like. I just don't think they care enough to put him on the hot seat. There's going to come a time, however, where if they don't start having some success, there will come a time he'll get fired if he doesn't leave first. I mean, he's going to have to figure out a way to turn this around. And I just don't – he's not going to be able to do that without firing a lot of people that he has so far been really unwilling to fire. I don't know why I don't know. Like I joke, we used to joke about Van Gorder. Like, what did Brian Van Gorder have on Brian Kelly? That, he's like, if you fire me, I'm releasing this to the public, kind of just jokingly. And I often kind of say that jokingly to friends about Lance Anderson. Like, what does Lance Anderson have on David Shaw that has allowed him to still be there? Because in all seriousness, Ryan, that guy has long been since performed in a way that just at every other school that gives any rip about football would have fired him.
Yeah.
It's just recruiting wise, production wise. I mean, they're about to have their 4th year in a row giving up over 29 points a game. I don't see how they do better than that. I mean, and right now they're giving up 38.5 points per game against FBS teams, because they're giving up over 30 now. And part of that is because they gave up 10 points to Colgate.
So I have no words for it, man. Like it's Brian. It's so weird because I still am living in my imagination where Shane Scove is still playing linebacker for Stanford, man. Like it's still when Stanford was, because it was my young adulthood at that point, right? Like watching the Stanford defense, and it was just like that defense was incredible for years. Like we talked about the names yesterday, right? The Chase Thomases, the Trent Murphys, the Shane Scoves, like the AJ Tarpleys, the Blake Martinez. Like they had so many good defensive players. And that's how the offense was built, man. Like they were built off of being better than you up front offensively, running the football, and being a stingy, well-coached defense. And they just have not been that defense for a few years. And it is bizarre to watch. I almost wonder if it's like at some point – it's more likely that David Shaw steps down, right? Resigns, than he's fired.
Sure.
But
I think that's true. I think he would do something with the, I'm going to go be an analyst or that's not a bad idea. Yeah. But probably I would think, because he's really good on TV. He's really good on the NFL draft stuff. Guy, and you see his personality come through more there than you do on the sidelines or post game of a show, where he's engaging, he's funny. And like you said, he's really smart, and he can explain. What I like about him is he can explain things in the draft in a way that is relatable. He's not like a lot of coaches who start talking over people's heads. Yeah. You know what I mean? And that's a talent. I mean, that's a talent. And so I could see him doing something like that, because he'd be really good at that. If NBC, the minute David Shaw retires from football.
Hey, David, there might be a spotted Irish breakdown for you, buddy, if you want to come by.
I can't afford David Shaw. One thing is Notre Dame should come and say, hey, you want to come do Notre Dame games? Be our color guy for Notre Dame? I mean, could you imagine David Shaw as a color analyst doing games? He'd be phenomenal at it.
I dig it, man.
Phenomenal at it. So I think it could be something like that. Sure. There's no doubt. All right, next one from Brian Hockney. How much playing time will Collie and Tuihalamaka see now that the loss of Beau Bauer? I don't think the Collie one really is impacted by Beau. At least I hope not. Tuihalamaka, we'll see. And we discussed at the beginning of the show, Brian. I hope that Tuihalamaka, it just steps into those snaps. Collie snaps need to be taken away from Maris Luafau as of right now. I think that Tuihalamaka, Beau in the last 3 games is had 6, 7, and 9 snaps, not in any particular order, just from lowest to highest. He's only played 22 snaps in the last 3 games combined. Yeah. Junior's played 7. I would just give Junior most of those snaps, because some of them will be like third down where it'll be Jack Kaiser maybe taking it or something like that. Sure. But I would give Junior those snaps for me. And I hope it's not Prince Collie, because I hope Prince is taking the snaps at will.
Well, I was going to say, I hope that Prince Collie's playing time is improving just based upon what he's been doing the last couple of weeks and fitting into the Will equation, not into the Mike equation, right? Like that's where I think that his bump's coming from, Brian. But from a Mike perspective, I hope Brian, you're right. I hope that Junior Tuihalamaka just picks up those snaps and kind of runs with it a little bit, man. Like he needs to get some burn, because
Well,
It just hasn't been good. So got to try something different to see if something might be good. You know what I mean? Like
yep.
it's insanity at this point. It's just
It
hitting your head
really
against the
is.
wall.
It really is, man. I want to go to that. We got a recruiting question coming up here next, Ryan,
Cool.
from Bailey Brad. What kind of player is Jeremiah McClellan? How would he fit into the Notre Dame offense? Just for some backstory so people understand who we're talking about here, if you're not someone who follows recruiting. Jeremiah McClellan is a 2024 receiver from Christian Brothers High School in St. Louis. He is a teammate of Notre Dame target Jeremiah Love. Ryan, I'll let you talk about it, but man, I'll tell you what, my opinion of Jeremiah McClellan has jumped up quite a bit as a junior. He's having a really good junior season, not just production wise, but he's a significantly better player this year than he was as a sophomore last year. So what kind of player is he in your view, and how would he fit into the Notre Dame offense?
Yeah, he is going to be on campus this weekend. If you're on boards.irishbreakdown.com, you would have known that because it was on the visitor list. And I also have a visitor preview that will be coming out pretty soon here. So
two big-time receivers from St. Louis are going to be on campus this weekend. That's Ryan is
they
talking
will
about.
be. Yep. And I mean, Brian McClellan, I think stylistically is sort of comparable to Lorenzo Styles, right? Like he's got some of that. He's got a similar body type right now. He's about 6'1", 6'1.5", 180 something pounds in that ballpark. He's just a really smooth kid, man. Like he gets in and out of breaks efficiently, good speed overall. He's been creating a lot of big plays, obviously, for Christian Brothers this year, but he's kind of that player, to the question, Bailey Brad, that I would say he's your playing to the field type of player, right? Like he can play outside, he can play a little bit inside, maybe as kind of that super smooth slot. So I think that Lorenzo Styles comp, they have some similar attributes to where they play. And it's kind of funny, Brian, because like I would have called Cam Williams similar to Lorenzo Styles before this season, but he is just developed from a body type perspective, man. Like the length is out of the gym right now, and he's kind of turning more into maybe a boundary to me.
He's starting to look a lot more physically like Kevin Austin.
Yes. Yep.
Like that's a good one. As a junior, like because Kevin got ripped up as a senior, like he's starting to look physically a lot like Kevin Austin. Yeah. He's another guy having a monster junior season. I mean, monster junior season. He has been really good, Cam Williams.
Yeah. And so it's funny though, because Cam was the same way before this. When they got Cam Williams to commit, I felt the same way about him. I was like, that's Lorenzo Styles-ish, right? Like he's going to work outside to the field. He's going to play in the slot a little bit, do all those things. But now that Cam has improved his explosiveness and he's just continued to grow into his body.
As he's gotten bigger.
Yes. As he continues to grow into that frame and get more explosive, now I'm like, that kid can play probably all three spots, but I'm like, Cam Williams, you might be my boundary receiver down the line, man. Like that might be you. You know what I mean? So I think that's why the fit makes more sense, because for a while we're like, is Notre Dame going to push hard for Jeremiah McClellan because it's a crowded receiver board? I think they end up because I think now you can kind of see it like Cam and him could fit really well together on top of still pursuing guys like Ryan Wingo and Michael Hudson and those guys in the world, right? So I really like what McClellan's done this year for Christian Brothers.
Agree completely. Jay Henry said, is there anything Notre Dame can take away from the Stanford game to prepare for Syracuse? Handling big receivers. Now, I think that is like if you can figure out a way to play clean against the big receivers on the perimeter against Stanford, it's going to help you against Oronde Gadsden Jr. I will say that. Outside of that, there's not a lot of similarities. Not the way that Stanford's playing now. But I do think that's an important one, because if you can show that you can handle the big receivers effectively, which we don't know because they haven't played guys like this, then I think that's a good sign for being able to keep Oronde Gadsden Jr. because he's not a huge volume guy yet.
No.
But he's a guy that can go rip off a 60-yarder because he just outplays you for the football down the field. Yep. And you have to avoid those type of plays. Anything else, Ryan, it's honestly, Jay, right now, man, this is about Notre Dame. Yeah. Like it's not about Syracuse. It's not about UNLV or Stanford. None of these three teams should be within 14 points of Notre Dame if Notre Dame plays their game. Yeah. And I'm saying 14 because that's the baseline. Like, Syracuse is a good football team. But I'm sorry, if Syracuse plays their A game and Notre Dame plays their A game, that game should not be a single-digit game. It just shouldn't.
I agree.
But neither should a Cal, right? Neither should BYU, and neither should a Marshall. So they haven't played their game yet. So to me, the takeaways from the Stanford game are more about how Notre Dame plays more so. And this may have been the point of his question too, Ryan.
Yeah.
We might have taken it incorrectly. those are the things, Jay, that I'm taking away from this game that look forward to Syracuse is, can you get up? Can you execute? Can you run the ball? Can you start getting some shots down the field? Can you handle the bigger? I mean, it's about Notre Dame at this point. And if they can be a more effective team, a more efficient team, a team that's built more on assignment correctness with some, I'm trying to think of I want them to be assignment correct with force.
Mm-hmm.
And that's like, even when they're assignment correct, sometimes on defense and offense, they're doing it with a lot of thought. So they're not playing with the same force. That's what the offensive line's done a better job of. They're more assignment correct, and they're starting to play with more force. I want to see more, but that's what's been a big reason for their effectiveness.
Yeah. I mean, I think that you hit on a great point, though. The ability to play against bigger boundary receivers, bigger receivers in general, would be a nice little peek, I guess, to how you defend Syracuse a little bit. But I mean, other than that, Brian, like, they are just completely different football teams, man. Like, Syracuse is athletic quarterback, big time run game. Stanford is not. Defensively, Syracuse has a lot of speed on the second level. Stanford does not. So they are very different football teams. But to your points, if you're able to lead this game where you've potentially limited the Michael Wilsons, Elijah Higgins of the world, that gives you like a little bit of confidence that, like, hey, we can go into the next game against Rondé Gatson Jr. and have a great game plan against him, because obviously he's been their guy at wide receiver so far for Syracuse.
Absolutely. Ladarius Martin says, what time's our show tomorrow? We'll go live at 1 again tomorrow, Ladarius, where our first 30 minutes or so will be about Notre Dame, and then we'll dive into the big games of the weekend. So that will be kind of how it goes tomorrow. Real quick super chat from Tommy Guns. He says, question to follow. Brian, if you let me sleep on your couch tomorrow night, I'll be there at the show with y'all. I wish man, you're a truck driver. Don't you have like a big bed in the back of your car you can just kind of hang out in? I'll let you do like Ryan did. I'll let you have let you park your RV in my, your truck in my driveway like Ryan did the RV. But man, you got a bed back there. It's probably more comfortable than my couch. So no, I'd have to talk to Ange about that one, Tommy. Sorry, I can't. I don't have the authority to answer that question. And every married man in this show is like, yeah, he's right.
True. Very good point. Yeah.
Here's one from Archer. Says, B. Ryan, will there be an IB Nation online dynasty for NCAA 2024? If so, who gets dibs on Notre Dame? And if it's not you, who are you taking? I call dibs on Ohio State. I hadn't even thought about that. That'd be fun. I've never played those things before. It would be fun. I would be afraid Ryan would get no work done, and I'd have to have a long talk with him. But or I may not get any work done, and he has to have a long talk with me. But I don't know who I'd take. I'd probably take Notre Dame. I usually always play with Notre Dame in the past. But
I'm so good at NCAA, it does not matter who I take.
Don't you play? Aren't you the one that told me you like to play with Navy?
Oh no, I like to play with the triple option.
Yeah, okay, gotcha. But not necessarily Navy. Okay.
No, any team doesn't matter. Either way, though, anybody can come get this work.
I know what that means. It is so weird. Kids these days.
As the kids say.
Remington Jeans says, do you feel Al Golden is 100% committed, or does he have head coaching in mind? I think you can do both. Yeah. I think good coaches, especially veteran coaches, know I'm focused on doing the best I can at this job, because I know that's then going to set up opportunities for me to do my career goals. That's what smart coaches do. That's what good coaches do. I don't think the issues I've had with Al Golden this year, I have never once thought, gee, I don't think this guy's committed. Gee, I don't think this guy's locked in. Gee, I think this guy's looking past his next job. I don't get that sense, Ryan. I just think it's a philosophical difference of opinion where he wants to do a little bit more complexity than I think he should do. To me, what he's doing now is what they should be doing in year 2, right? Or maybe November, as they've gotten more and more comfortable with it. And you were able to get away with it against Ohio State because you had a whole offseason to prepare for it. But once you got through that game, and you needed to, you haven't needed to be as complex as they've been against Marshall. You haven't needed to be as complex as they were against Cal. You haven't needed to be as complex as they were against to a degree, North Carolina. I thought they actually did a decent job of not being overly complex against North Carolina because of the tempo.
Yeah.
And you were very good that game until you gave us some garbage plays at the end of the game. I mean, to me, that was your best defensive game of the season so far. When you just consider since Ohio State was your best defensive performance since Ohio State. They got garbage stuff late, but even with those garbage plays late, they still held them like it was like at the time it was like over 200 yards below their season average at the time, right? That's crazy. It's nuts, and it's still like 150 below their season average. So I just think that it's a philosophical difference. It's not me questioning his commitment, his focus, or anything like that. I've never heard a thing to make me think or doubt that. And if anything, if he was thinking about his next gig, he'd be doing whatever he can to maximize the team now.
100%.
He'd probably, you know what I mean? He'd probably, hey, look, I got some guys here. We don't play very good teams for a while. Let me just go out here and let these guys take over, et cetera, et cetera. I think he'd be more focused on those things as opposed to, because like he's kind of going at it with like a bit of just, perhaps I'm wrong, but when you do what he's doing, you're taking a bit of a long-term approach. You know, hey, look, we're going to do this year, and and we're going to take our lumps, but next year when we come back, these kids are going to know all this stuff, and we're going to be really good at linebacker. Yep. And you know, I don't agree with that, but I think that's partly why, because like you can disagree with what a coach does and not personally dislike him or think he's a bad coach. I don't like a lot of things that Tommy Rees is doing. I like Tommy Rees. I do. I've had good interactions with Tommy Rees. I just don't agree with how he's running the offense right now. Doesn't make him a bad coach or a bad person or whatever else. Al Golden, I think he's a really good football coach. I just don't necessarily agree with with what he's doing right now philosophically. But even then, he's still putting a good product on the field, you know, and as we discussed yesterday. So, I don't think there's anything nefarious behind it. I just think it's just a philosophical difference of opinion, in my opinion. Beefeater says, Brian Ryan, what are the odds we see Jabron Payne this weekend? Well, if Ryan and I's predictions come true, our score predictions come true, you will probably see Jabron Payne this weekend. But it's just going to be about putting a team away.
I'll be interested to see him too, if and when we do see him. You know, obviously we've talked a lot about the injuries over the last couple of years, but haven't heard anything negative from that front so far, right, Brian? So hopefully he looks healthy and back to his old form, man. I'm excited to see him if he can get on the field.
Yep. Patrick Quinlan asks, do you think the lack of takeaways is due to something inherent in Al Golden's defense? Just bad luck? Why can't we get more takeaways? Sort of on the first one, Ryan. Sort of. It's not something inherent in Al Golden's defense system, like system-wise, philosophically. It's when you are thinking, you're always going to be a split second later getting to where you need to get to, and that is, in my opinion, a lot of what's getting to the lack of disruption, the lack of pass breakups, the lack of tip ball, the lack of tip balls, the lack of interceptions, the lack of jumping routes, the lack of those kind of things is really what I think a lot of that boils down to.
Yep.
So it's not schematically a problem where, like, in 3 years, if he's still here, they still aren't turning the ball over at all. It's more of because you're putting so much on them this early, I don't think they're playing as fast as they otherwise would have, which would lead to more turnovers. Agree or disagree?
I agree with that. And I would also say that there has been spouts of bad luck, right? Like the Clarence Lewis interception that was negated. Last game, Brandon Joseph had a forced fumble that BYU was able to get back on top of. There was that, Clarence Lewis near scoop and score that was almost a forced fumble in the one game as well. So there's been some bad luck. I mean, but to your point, Brian, getting more comfortable
the one
in the
where
system.
He picked the guy off and JD had the penalty that took that back? Did you?
I forgot about that. Oh, is that Clarence Lewis, right? Wasn't that Clarence?
Yes.
Yep, that was the first one I said. Yeah. So all those there's been bad luck for sure. But to your point, I agree. As you become more trusting in the system, you're able to move around faster, you're able to read things a little faster. That's where turnovers are usually created. So I still think there's some players that just aren't super comfortable in the role in the defense. But I do think that for this one, Patrick, I would say it's a little bit of everything, right? Like there's definitely been some plays. I just named 3 or 4 where they're near turnovers that just did not happen because it's just like one thing did not work. One player did the wrong assignment. A player gets back on the top of the football. Just some bad luck stuff has happened. Yes.
Ryan wants that smoke, or Archer wants that smoke, Ryan. He wants that smoke.
Take CJ Stroud. I got you, buddy.
Yeah. John A1, this is a really good question, Ryan. John A1 says, if not that we should be surprised, John A1 always asks great questions. But he says, if Notre Dame is determined to use 12 and 13 personnel, how can the offense be more explosive targeting the number 2 and number 3 wide tight ends? We chat, John, this was a little bit of what we chatted about before the BYU game. I think using them more to spread the field, when they were in 13 personnel, they almost always had them condensed. It was either in a bunch alignment or they were like attached kind of thing. I would say, hey, do some things where you split them out a little bit, get them in some isolations. If they're going to go, if the defense is going to substitute personnel to match your 13 personnel, then you've got advantages in the pass game if you're willing to spread them out. So maybe you go a situation where you go 13 personnel with, let's say Davis Sherwood's in the game.
Mm-hmm.
You can do some things where you go empty, or you empty out your running back, or negate your running back, and you've got your other two tight ends plus receiver plus Chris Tyree or Logan Diggs outside, and David Sherwood can stay in a block, or you have Audric Estime, or one of the other backs in the game, and you have three true tight ends in the game, and then Holden Stace, Eli Raridan, and Michael Mayer with the receiver. There's a lot of things you can do with spreading them out, Ryan. I don't know if I would have done that in the first game with the young guys, but that's something you can certainly build to with them. Mm-hmm. And I think the other one too is being more effective with how you use your play action game. I think is a part of it. I mean, the screen that you ran, use Michael Mayer as a decoy to then throw a screen back to Eli Raridan or Holden Stace. I think those are different aspects of it. It's just stuff like that. And then some of the stuff we saw Jaden Thomas run with the seam routes and stuff like that, let Holden Stace run those as well out of those alignments. I'm not saying don't let Jaden Thomas run them. I like Jaden Thomas in slot. What I'm saying is when you're in 13 personnel, you can still run those routes effectively with a Holden Stace and Eli Raridan. So it's just about building on to them more. I mean, I never thought they should put Tobias Merriweather in there and let him play 60 snaps the first two games that he played. I mean, it's building to the point where now he could play 30, 40 snaps a game. Right. Well, these guys are now getting that opportunity where they're slowly working to where hopefully by Syracuse you can use them more in the pass game. Because as you said, John, you're going to have to find ways to throw the football effectively. And I thought they tried to do that against BYU. They did a good job of out of their 12 and 13 personnel trying to throw the football. It just wasn't overly effective. BYU played it pretty well. But just I think getting a little bit more creative as they get more experience is the key for me, Ryan. Anything that you would like to add to that?
Well, no, I was going to say for the play action game, that's like the big one for me. And you mentioned that, but I would say like philosophically, like let's just change up how we attack defenses, right? Like instead of, because Notre Dame's a big like, hey, we're going to run sticks, flats, and slide routes a ton, right? Like that's kind of what they do off their play action game with the tight ends. Let's run some more seams. Let's run some corner routes. Let's do some stuff where, we have some switch stuff with tight ends in the passing game. Like I think there's a lot of ways that you can manipulate the defense, but use it more vertically oriented than what you have been so far. Because like right now, like, tight end leak for one, right? Seam balls. Like there's ways that I think you can get the tight ends in space more effectively than you have so far. Because for the most part, like the tight ends have been kind of used outside of Michael Mayer's occasional wheel route, right? They've been used mostly as after catch players, right? Let's hit them off of play action on a little slide route. Well, instead of off of play action hitting a slide route, why don't we play action and hit a tight end on a corner route? Because that corner is going to get sucked up if there's somebody running into the flat out of a multiple tight end set. So I think just structurally changing some of the route concepts you like to run off the play action, I think you can just make more explosive plays just by giving opportunity more than anything.
Next question is from Keith Wiegand. Is it just me, or does it seem when Notre Dame does break a big play, they never get it in for a touchdown? I don't think that they've really had a lot of those type of plays. I mean, every time they've had a big play opportunity, there's always been someone in front of them.
Yeah,
and that's and a lot of that has to do with the fact that teams are playing so condensed. It's just been hard for the backs to kind of break out. Mm-hmm. I think that's part of it. As you get better at stretching the field, and there's also been some misses. I mean, Braden Lindsey has a 75-yard touchdown under his belt right now. If Tyler Buckner doesn't miss him in the second quarter against Marshall, I mean, there's been some missed opportunities. So, I mean, your observation is correct, Keith. I agree with it. I just think it's there's been reasons for it, and you got to get better about that. And this is a game where that needs to happen, to be honest with you.
Yep.
Folklore says, has Chancey Stuckey been an upgrade in the receiver room, and do you see the receivers fundamentally getting better as the year goes on? Yes and yes. I mean, first of all, Chancey Stuckey could still be a bad receivers coach, and it's an upgrade. I mean, Del Alexander was terrible. But Chancey Stuckey's not been terrible. He's deprogramming a lot of things, just like Coach Eastand is. I think the receivers have played better the last two games. They have. They've played fundamentally better. They just haven't gotten the opportunities. Mm-hmm. Now, when the opportunities have come, they've made plays, Ryan. I mean, that's the thing. We saw against North Carolina. We saw that against BYU. In both games, they weren't targeted a lot, but when they were targeted, they made plays.
Yeah.
And, Lorenzo did a great job getting open on his touchdown route. Jaden Thomas did a great job. He didn't get open, but he did a great job of still winning, on the ball. They both worked open on the seams. There were other opportunities where the receivers could have had more production. The ball just didn't get to them. So, yeah, I think the receivers have definitely gotten better. There's no doubt in my mind. They've definitely gotten better. Mark Avalon asked this question, Ryan. He says, is Foskey, this is an interesting question, Ryan. I'm curious to get your opinion on this. Is Foskey lining up too far outside to get to the quarterback, trying to run around trying to run around blocker technique? We're seeing this a lot on third down, Ryan, where Foskey just lines up really wide and just kind of takes a wide technique.
I think for me, like, there's a necessity to it to a degree, because one thing about Isaiah Foskey is he's a speed to power type of dude, right? Like, he's not the bendiest edge rusher of all time. So, I mean, for me, Mark, like, you need to create an angle for yourself, right? Like, softening angles is a skill as a pass rusher. And I don't think that Isaiah Foskey can just turn a corner and corner at a high rate as a pure outside track kid. But if you line him up a little more outside, that kind of gives him an angle where he might be able to win an outside track and still have the speed and power stuff. So I don't think so. No, I think what hurts Isaiah Foskey from a consistent production perspective on a snap-to-snap basis as a pass rusher is I just don't think that he has much of a plan of attack, right? Like, he doesn't have secondary moves in his arsenal. I don't think it's a alignment problem with him. I think it's more of a nuanced perspective of how he attacks the passer for me.
Next question, Ryan, comes from Archer. He has a CFB question, college football question, and there's he says the Big Ten has 5 of the top 10 teams in total defense at the halfway point of the year. How much of that is really good defense, and how much of that is really bad offense? With all due respect, Archer, a lot of that has to do with really bad offense.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the defenses are good in the Big Ten, right? Penn State's got a decent defense. You obviously Iowa's got a great defense. It's just their offense is putrid. Illinois is a really good defense. Ohio State's got a much improved defense. Michigan's got a solid defense. It's not as good as its numbers show because they haven't played any good offenses. There's some bad offensive. And honestly, a lot of it comes down to, like, when I look at the ACC and you're seeing some teams scoring some points and having some success this year and some surprising teams. You've seen the Big 12 where some teams are emerging. It's good quarterback play. Max Duggan stepping up at TCU. Jalen Daniels at Kansas. You're seeing, and you go out to the Pac-12. I know you don't like him, but Bo Nix since the Georgia game has played really good football. He has. You can't deny it. He's played really good football. You look at Cameron Rising, Utah. He's a good, steady player. You look at Dorian Thompson-Robinson. He's finally playing more to his potential and not to the inconsistent guy we've seen for so many years. You're seeing in the ACC, Riley Leonard stepping up at Duke. That's been a big part of their resurgence, right? What I see in the Big Ten is outside of C.J. Stroud, it's not a lot very good quarterback play. And at times it's just downright bad quarterback play. I mean, if Illinois had a competent quarterback, that's a really good football team. There's just bad quarterback play in that conference. Like, the kid at Michigan State has just steadily regressed. Like, every game he's played, Michigan's not letting and J.J. McCarthy, Michigan's not turning him loose, really. They're kind of still treating him like they got Cade McNamara at quarterback, But I think that's a big part of it, Ryan, is just the quarterback play in that conference is bad. Outside of the stud at Ohio State. I mean, it's bad.
And Spencer Petras. Don't forget about him.
My sarcasm meter's kind of full today, so I'm not going to laugh too much at that one. But it's that's the biggest thing for me. It's bad quarterback play, really bad quarterback play.
I think it's like one of those things, though. To Archer's question, it's usually a mixture, right? But I agree with you in the fact that, like, JJ is completing a high percentage of passes for Michigan, but he's not really being put in situations to create a ton of explosive plays, right? Nebraska, Casey Thompson has gone downhill since his first game. Ryan Helinski.
Against a team that we now know sucks really bad.
Yes. Ryan Helinski looked good against Nebraska, and he is not good, apparently. Right. Spencer Petras is one of the worst FBS quarterbacks I have ever seen at a big-time program. Just not good, man. Tanner Morgan's been playing pretty good football, but we know that Tanner Morgan's still a little limited, if we're being completely honest.
Right. He's physically limited, but he can run that offense. And
he's
look,
good in that offense. Sure.
And the only game he hasn't played well so far, in my opinion, is the game they didn't have their stud at running back. I mean, he didn't play great against Purdue. Well, why? Because there was no running game to think of. Minnesota is a completely different team when Muhammad Ibrahim's in the game. Completely different team.
Yep.
So how does he bounce back from his poor performance against Purdue? But he's a system guy, Ryan. That's the point you're making. He's a system guy. He's not he's not a guy that's going out there making a ton of plays and doing all that. He's a system guy, and he needs all the weapons around him. But I mean, after that, Ryan, I mean, you look at the play. I mean, just the numbers. I mean, just Aiden O'Connell. That's another one. Aiden O'Connell's a good football player. He's good. Yeah. And like Talia Tagovailoa, I mean, he'll look good for 2-3 series. We're like, okay, he's finally turned a corner, and they'll just make a throw. You're just like, what are you doing? Like, what? Yeah. Why? It just the quarterback play in that league is, and I always forget about Aiden O'Connell. I don't know why.
Aiden O'Connell's solid, yeah.
And what's the bad game they had was against Florida Atlantic. They were terrible against Florida Atlantic, and that's the game he didn't play.
Yep.
So and they barely beat Florida Atlantic. So man, it is bad. It's just bad offense, in my opinion.
And you can't talk about bad quarterback play in the Big Ten without talking about Rutgers. It's very bad at Rutgers.
Oh my gosh,
it's very bad.
I mean, you could argue that Spencer Petras is not the worst quarterback in the Big Ten right now.
Yeah, you could. I mean, Rutgers has had a rotating door at quarterback, man. Yeah, they've had the Gavin Winslet and the Evan Simon, and it's Noah Vedral. Yeah, it's not great.
They all stink. I mean, they really do. They're all pretty terrible. And I mean, their starting quarterback has 4 touchdowns and 6 interceptions.
Yep,
that's not good. That's not good. I mean, I guess it could be worse. Spencer Petras has 2 touchdowns and 3 interceptions.
And he hasn't split time with anybody either. It's like he's the guy. He's the guy.
I've never seen an offense that bad. I mean, I've never seen anything like it. They have a 500 record. They literally have a 500 record, and they're averaging 14.7 points per game.
It is the worst offensive line I have ever seen at Iowa in my lifetime. Yeah. No exaggeration. The worst I've ever
They couldn't run the ball last year either. That was what was weird about their team. With the same back that ran the ball really well in 2020.
Yeah.
It's very strange. Yep. Very, very strange. You could argue, it's kind of funny, it's a comment somebody just made. I would argue that the two most talented quarterbacks in the Big Ten play in the same team. Just one of them's a backup right now.
Ohio State?
Yeah, Kyle McCord. Kyle McCord will start for any other team in the Big Ten, in my opinion. Every single one. Every single one. Maybe Michigan. J.J. McCarthy's really talented. His lack of production is more about how they're using him, not his lack of talent.
Mm-hmm.
And to some degree, I get it. Like, they're bringing him along slowly. They didn't just throw the offense on his shoulders the way that Notre Dame did with Tyler Buchner, his first 2 starts. They're bringing him all. It's like, okay, dude, he's got 5 starts under his belt. Can we turn him loose a little bit, please? Like, let the kid, use his legs. Stop running the Cade McNamara offense with him at quarterback, please.
I still hated that whole back and forth between McNamara and McCarthy before the season, though, because everyone knew what it was going to end up being. Everyone knew it. They just didn't want to do it for some reason.
Right. Part of me thinks that it was to take some of the pressure off McCarthy. Because, look, Cade got his shot, then you came in, and then if he doesn't play well, then, Cade gets a start. And then, if you just throw him out there in that opener and let's say he struggles, then it's like, Cade took us to the playoff. All the people, how Michigan fans are. Most fans are this way. You cry for the one guy to be the quarterback, but as soon as he plays bad, you're the first ones crying about why did he start and why didn't you play the other guy, and just kind of how it goes. Yep. So, all right, next question from A Bent ND. How has Notre Dame done overall to battle NIL for pay for play this cycle? Do you anticipate the NCAA doing anything to regulate anytime soon? No, I do not expect the NCAA to do anything. They're cowards. They will not do anything because they're afraid of being sued. And they basically just have been derelict in their duties. Notre Dame is trying to identify kids. Like, if kids start talking to Notre Dame about wanting NIL money now, Notre Dame just basically stops. They just stop recruiting them. There are things Notre Dame is doing to help kids connect with certain people to do NIL the right way, but it's not going to come from Notre Dame. There are also collectives have stepped up, and their collectives are offering, kids are going to start getting 5 figures now from the collectives, every kid. That's part of it. But then the other part of it is still keep selling what makes you unique. Hey, yeah, you can go get your $1 million over 4 years, or you can come here to Notre Dame, and if you don't, and we'll develop you an NFL player, but if we don't, you're going to go get $1 million a year because of the degree that you get. And that's still a sales pitch. And if a kid's not smart enough to understand that, or if a family's not smart enough to understand that, the reality is they weren't going to come to Notre Dame anyway, because they were still going to take the $100,000 that would have been offered if there wasn't NIL under the table, right? I mean, Tennessee's now, they don't have to hide their money in McDonald's bags now. They can just give it through NIL, through collectives. That's basically how it works. Brent Smith said, I'd like a Jalen Snead update. Do the two of you have any interesting news on the matter? Well, look at Brent being all demanding of information. It's funny. I'm kidding, Brent. It's funny that you mentioned this because I literally have gotten 2 updates on Jalen Snead in the last 24 hours. And they both were that, like, over the last week or two, kind of like going into buy into now, the light's starting to go on a little bit. He's starting to figure things out, which means he's starting to play faster. He's starting to make more plays because he's an explosive guy. So I think what you would see first is maybe Jalen playing a little bit of special teams first, then maybe working on to your not starting defense, but start into the defensive rotation. But I wouldn't be shocked if we start to see him on some special teams here moving forward, Ryan. I really wouldn't be shocked. John A1 asks, how many Notre Dame offensive players should opposing defenses truly be concerned with? Right now, it seems like Mayer's the only guy, and everyone else is good but won't break you. I will say this. It's 2 with an asterisk. Mm-hmm. And the asterisk of the 2 is really 3 guys into 1. It's like the running backs kind of form Voltron. You know what I mean? Like they're kind of all those guys as one, right? You have to have a plan for Notre Dame's running back. Whoever's in the game, that guy can hurt you. Mm-hmm. But other than that, it's Mayer. I mean, right now, if I'm a defense, Mayer and the running backs are the only guys I'm concerned about. Like, I'm not just going to not cover Lorenzo Styles or Braden Lindsey. I mean, I recognize that there's speed, but I don't have to do anything different schematically right now to plan for Lorenzo Styles and Braden Lindsey. I don't think that's necessarily all their fault. I think part of that's how they're used. And that goes back to our keys to victory that we discussed earlier, Ryan, with Stanford is this is a game where you as the offensive coordinator to do things game plan wise to get those guys going so that that's not the case when you're getting ready to go play Syracuse and Stanford. Mm-hmm. That's up to you at this point in time. And then, of course, the quarterback's got to get the ball out. But right now, I think John's right. It's Mayer and is obviously the obvious one, but I still would throw – I think – and we saw BYU do this. BYU was prepared for the Notre Dame running backs in this game. Mm-hmm. My only issue was they didn't use them for decoys more. That was my thing, is use them to set some stuff up.
Yep.
But yeah, I mean, you have to count for the running backs, in my opinion. You do.
100%.
Here's an interesting – this is going to ask me a question. Jonathan Gabrick says, David Shaw is the Pat Fitzgerald of the Pac-12. David Shaw is a better coach than Pat Fitzgerald and has had significantly more success than Pat Fitzgerald. Having said that, here's my question for you, Ryan. Mm-hmm. Who has a chance of being on the hot seat fastest, and who – first of all, between those two, I'll ask that question first, between David Shaw and Pat Fitzgerald.
I think it's – well, look, there's an asterisk here because, again, if Stanford doesn't care about having a competitive football team, then that throws a wrench in the whole conversation. I think based upon what it's been the last few years, though, yes, Northwestern's been very up and down, but there have been a couple years where they were a good football team. Like, it seems like every other year or every third year they come up with this magical 10-win season, but then they'll go back down to 4-8 or whatever the heck they're doing, right? So I would say David Shaw deserves to be more on the hot seat right now than Pat Fitzgerald. But again, if Stanford doesn't care, then that doesn't really matter. Right. So that's where. Does
Northwestern care? That's
probably not. Probably not as much. I mean,
they're building that new football
stadium than Stanford. I mean, that's the question,
I think they do not. I think Stanford cares less. Northwestern's investing and just spent time raising money. They're going to build that new football stadium, which is going to have less seating than their current one. But when you look at their average attendance, it's really a smart business move because they don't have huge attendance anyway, right? Yeah. And if you have less attendance, then it's one of those things where the people that do like to come and the diehards that you do have, it creates greater demand, which greater demand equals higher prices, which means more money, right? I mean, they've had 20,000 people, at their games this year. I mean, let's go back and look. When was the last time they were good in a non-COVID year? 2018. They hosted Notre Dame. They had 47,000 people at that game. They had 47,000 people at the Wisconsin game. They had 47,000 people in Nebraska and Michigan. A lot of those are those other opponents, Duke. So they were in the 40s in some of those games. Well, now you're taking 5,000 to 12,000 fewer seats in those type of games when they are good. And now all of a sudden the demand for those tickets goes through the roof. Yeah. And when your team's not good, you're still only going to have 25,000 people there. 20 to 23,000 people is what their average attendance been is this year. But guess what? Stadium doesn't look as empty.
Sure.
Right. So it creates a little bit better environment. So it makes sense for a team like Stanford, to be completely honest with you, to do that. So now here's the question. Who's worse? Stanford or Northwestern? I think it's Northwestern by a mile. I think Stanford would beat Northwestern convincingly.
Convincingly? Oh, I think it'd be a good football. I think it'd be a good football game.
Yeah.
I don't know who would win that game.
I think they'd
really
win by 10 or more. I do. Northwestern's terrible.
They are,
because here's the thing:
Stanford's
1-4, Ryan. But every single loss they've had has been to a quality Power 5 team. Like, I mean, can we agree to that? Right? Their 4 losses to USC's a top 10 team. Oregon's right outside the top 10. Washington's 4-2. They just got knocked out of the top 25, but they're still a good football team. And Oregon State's 4-2. They've lost to 4 good football teams, and they were more competitive in those games, in my opinion, than Northwestern was against Wisconsin. The Penn State game was weird. I don't know if you watched that game, it was horrible field conditions. Horrible field conditions. It was raining. It was totally wet. Penn State was like, let's just get out of this game. I mean, that's what Penn State was doing. But they lost to Ohio, right? No, I'm sorry. They lost to Miami of Ohio. They lost to Duke. They lost to Southern Illinois at home, Miami of Ohio at home, and then they just lost to Wisconsin 42-7 the week after Wisconsin fired their head football coach.
Amen. PFF told me earlier that the second most explosive, big-time throws in the country are by Graham Mertz this year. All right? So
you're really like plucking every last nerve that I have today.
It actually was a stat, though. I'm not making it up.
PFF, they're a joke. PFF also graded Oklahoma's defense out higher against TCU than it graded Notre Dame's defense out against Ohio State. So there's that for how much value I put in what Pro Football Focus does with those type of things. So, but yeah, I mean, Northwestern's really bad. And I mean, you look at their schedule, and I mean, who are they going to beat? They get Maryland on the road this week, or they got to bye, then Maryland on the road, then Iowa on the road, then Ohio State at home, then at Minnesota, at Purdue, and home against Illinois. I mean, they could conceivably go 1-11 this year. And they'll probably upset somebody, right?
Sure.
But they're going to be bad, and that would mean that they would be 3-9 or worse in 3 of their last 4 seasons. The only exception being the COVID year. They went 3-9 in 2019. They went 3-9 last year, and they're going to be lucky to go 3-9 this year.
Yeah,
which is a lot like what Stanford has done. Stanford's been that bad too, except for the COVID year. They were like 4-2 in the COVID year. They stunk the year before that. They stunk the year after, and they stink this year. So they've both been pretty bad.
I think instead of Notre Dame playing Stanford so often, they should play Northwestern instead. Stanford, that is.
Stanford should play Northwestern.
Yeah.
You remember when a good Stanford team got upset by Northwestern a few years ago? Do you remember that?
What year
2019?
was it? 2019.
Yeah. They beat them that year. No, I'm sorry. That wasn't the year. It was the year Kevin Hogan was the quarterback. Stanford stunk when they beat him in 2017. I'm trying to remember the year it was. There was a year where Stanford had a pretty good football team. Was it 16 or 15? Might have been the 15. Hold on. Give me a second. I'm going to find this one, Ryan. They had a game where they lost early in the year to Northwestern. Maybe it was the year they went 4-8, and everybody just thought they were going to be good that year. Give me a second. All right. I thought I could have swore. Let me find it. I'm going to look it up this way. Yeah, it was supposed to be a game that Stanford was going to win, and Stanford came in ranked, and Northwestern beat them. I'm going to find this. They've only played 8 times in history. That surprises me.
That is surprising.
That surprises me a lot. Yeah, it was 2015. It was the 2015 team. Because remember, that team ended up being really good, right? I mean, that team, by the end of the year, that's the team for Stanford that went out and won the Rose Bowl.
Was that McCaffrey?
That was the McCaffrey team that beat Notre Dame at the end of the game. They went out and played Iowa in the Rose Bowl, smacked Iowa that year. They lost to Northwestern that year in the opener at Northwestern 16-6. Then the next week they went out and blasted UCF. Then they beat USC on the road, blew out Oregon State, blew out Oregon, blew out UCLA, blew out Washington, beat Washington State on the road by 2, blew out Colorado, lost by 2 at home to Oregon. Then they beat Cal by 13. Then they had the comeback win over Notre Dame. Then they beat USC in the Pac-12 title game 41-22, and then blew out Iowa at the end of the year. And that Northwestern team was pretty decent that year too. They went 10-3. They weren't as good as Stanford, but they were a decent team. But yeah, they beat them 16-6. I knew that game had happened. I just got it confused with the 19 game that was 17-7. But
it's almost the same score.
Yeah. But Stanford won that one in 19.
Yeah.
So I was trying to figure out when it would be. Kevin Marzalek says, any word if Stanford it will be scheduled past 2024? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I haven't heard anything one way or the other about that. It's probably a good idea to start looking into it. I personally would like to see that series be over as an every year series. I mean, play them 4 times out of every 10 years. Schedule a couple home and homes, and then take 4 years off, home and home, take 4 years off, home and home. I'd like to see something like that. Mix in UCLA, mix in some other teams. I'd rather see that. I'm tired of playing Stanford every year, especially if the school doesn't care. And honestly, I'd rather play if you want to play an academic-oriented school, and play Northwestern. Save yourself a bunch of money on expenses for travel. I mean, it's way cheaper to travel to Northwestern than it is. It's a bus trip. Notre Dame doesn't have many opportunities to play teams that are bus trips. Save a ton of money. The cost of getting a hotel and feeding your team and all that stuff in California is way higher than it is for Northwestern or Purdue or something like that. If you want to play an academic school, then play Northwestern right now. Because, I mean, they stink too, but at least, and I don't think going to Northern California every other year necessarily is a huge recruiting boost. Now, it's an alumni boost because there's a lot of Notre Dame alumni out there, but there's got to be more to it, scheduling a game every single year than just that. To me, there has to be. Jonathan Gabrick says, depending on how the game goes, if Notre Dame is blowing them out, do you keep Pine in to get more reps because he didn't play the first 2 games, or do you risk it to get Steve in and have him get experience? I think they got to play. I think Drew Pine has played well enough the last 2 games that I'm not pulling him at like halftime or anything like that. But if you're up 41-10, 38-10 going into the fourth quarter or late third quarter, I would get Steve time. The only exception would be is if Drew was struggling, and I'd want to kind of have a series where he had a good series to kind of send him out with some momentum. But you got to get Steve some reps.
Yeah,
and there's not. Go ahead, Ryan.
Oh no, I was just going to say more often than not, if Notre Dame is blowing this team out, it probably tells me that Pine probably had a decent game, at least a good game, most likely. Right. So I mean, yes, but I agree with you. If he's struggling and they're still somehow blowing them out, I'm okay with keeping it for.
Because I'm thinking like Wisconsin game, but reversed in the first half, right? Something like that. Where he's not really playing that great, but
makes sense.
Because like you look at the schedule, UNLV should be a game where Angeli gets some playing time. Navy and BC are about the only other games you look at and say, based off the matchup now, the only games that I think we even have. I mean, are you really anticipating blowing out Syracuse that way, or Clemson, or USC? I don't think so. I mean, you're running out of chances of games where you're going to be able to get this kid into the game. So you got to err on the side of we got to get this kid some snaps because you can play him 4 games. I would personally only play him 3 in the regular season. I would just want to, just in case something happens to Drew in the bowl game, you have a chance that you don't. Worst thing you do is you play Steve Angeli 4 games in the regular season, and the Drew Pine sprains his ankle in the first quarter of the bowl game, and then Angeli's got to blow his eligibility in a bowl game. Or you put Ron Paulson III in the game and just take an L. I mean, that would be the other. I don't mean that disrespectfully, but you're not winning games with that kid at quarterback, in my opinion, unless you're already winning big.
Yeah.
So I would only play him in 3, but even with 3, Ryan, you're running out of opportunities to get him into the game. You're going to have limited possessions against Navy, most likely, right? BC, it's not a given that BC is going to be a blowout. We have no idea how BC is going to progress. Some weeks they look good. Some weeks they look terrible. Do you get the Louisville version of BC or the Florida State version of BC? I don't know the answer to that question. So I would definitely get him. I hope this is a game that you can get him and some other players in the game. I really do.
Agree.
Jason Rose. Hey, Brian and Ryan, which players on each side of the ball need to play better for Notre Dame to keep this thing rolling? I'm going to give mine real quick, Ryan. Drew Pine, Blake Fisher, Lorenzo Styles. Offense. What say you?
I agree with Drew Pine. I agree. I would throw Zeke Correll in there because I think Correll's turning the corner a little bit. So I would say Zeke Correll, and I would also say Lorenzo Styles.
Yeah,
I would agree with those.
And when I say play better, it's not that Drew Pine's playing bad. It's just there's another level he can get to as he gets more experience that I want to see him get to.
Yeah,
that's don't miss some of the throws we've said. Hey, he didn't see that read. You need to hit those against Clemson and USC. Right. So and then Corral and Fisher, and then that's a good one. Zeke Corral, that's a good one, Ryan. Defensively, Foskey, whoever your will linebacker is, Brandon Joseph and Cam Hart.
Okay. Yeah. I agree with the secondary members. I also agree with Foskey. I was just going to say Maris Loifeld, but I can turn that into the will linebacker position because if it's Prince, it's Prince. It really doesn't matter to me.
Right.
And then I would say Jason Adamalola, continue to get better and see more of consistently what he can be.
Yep, that's a good one. I think you could also make a case for Riley Mills. He's been good so far this year. I'd like to see him kind of become even a little bit more of a productive playmaker. He's been quietly steady this year, I think. It ain't rocket science. Botelho has been rocked to sleep these last few seasons. They kept him on the pine forever when he's been a ferocious competitor. The kid just needs experience, in my opinion. I disagree with that. John A1 said, did Botelho lose his confidence? What's going on with him? Look, the thing about you all have to understand about Jordan Botelho is he's a very undisciplined football player, and I just don't think he's a natural football player. He is an explosive athlete. Mm-hmm. He can be a weapon. He can be dangerous. The problem is, Ryan, he just doesn't show much feel for the game, or he hasn't so far. Yeah. And, they played him a lot. Was it against Marshall? They played a lot?
And he missed that one tackle on the big run. Yeah.
He was bad. So, he just was running into blockers. So I don't know if they're asking if he's having the same issue with the other linebackers, if moving him all over the place kind of has gotten in his head. I don't know what the reason is, but he has not played well in the times we've seen him. He really hasn't. No. So who are you going to take off the field? Right. They've played a lot of teams that spread the field and throw the football. So Rover's not a good fit. Mm-hmm. Is he going to handle the mental acumen of what they're requiring the linebackers to do? Nope. Are you going to take Isaiah Foskey off the field or Justin Adamiola off the field? That's the question.
That's what I was going to say is I think that for his sake, he's probably a Viper, right? And if he's a Viper, then you're going to be taking a good football player off the field.
To put him on. Good football players off the field.
Yes, very fair.
Because when Isaiah's not in the field, I want Justin Adamiola to be there, not Isaiah Foskey. Yep. So, yes, let's get down here. Brent Smith, do you trust Jaden Mickey playing man in the slot? Right now, no, but eventually I will. Right. I mean, when Jaden learns to be more patient, he's going to be a really good football player. Mm-hmm. He is. Because he's had some good snaps this year, Ryan. It's just the ones that are bad are really bad. And they're usually because he bites. He bites on the double move, which is what we talked about. This was the danger this offseason, right? But do I trust him today? No. Would I keep kind of throwing him out there in hopes of the light going on over the next couple games and hopefully he gets rolling by Clemson? Yeah, I would. Because you can live with the mistakes against the teams you're playing now. Because if the light goes on, you got yourself a heck of a football player. You do.
Wait, so Brian, you're allowed to play a freshman that you don't fully trust but has potential?
Yes, you can. Yes, you can. Yes, you can. You're allowed to do that. You're allowed to play freshmen. Imagine that. Jason, freshman skill players. Jason Rose says, Brian, do you feel the constant defensive coordinator turnover is part of the inconsistencies because they're always learning new schemes? I don't think you can dismiss that as a factor. I don't know if I'd say it's the driving factor, but it's a factor. It's certainly a factor. I'd be foolish to not say it's a factor, Jason. Absolutely, it's a factor. Is it in the top 5 of reasons? Probably. Yeah. Is it number 1? I don't think so.
Well, we just talked about the inconsistencies at points because players aren't fully trusting in what their responsibilities are, right? What their role is in the defense. And I think when you have constant turnover, that it's hard to get comfortable, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that you're onto something there, Jason, to agree with Ryan here that, there is something to that, I think, right? If Al Golden is back next year as the defensive coordinator, I'm interested to see how much growth a lot of these players have dealing with him for a second straight offseason, for a second season. I think that's where growth happens in those situations. So I do think there's something to it. I agree.
Basin Domer, how many safety blitzes will Golden call this game? I hope the answer is 0.
Yeah, they're just not good at it, man.
Yeah. I'm China Phillips. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. See it.
Shane.
Question. Shane. Okay, Shane Phillips. USC versus Utah predictions from Brian and Ryan. You're going to have to wait till tomorrow. I pulled this up because I wanted to remind people that this will be one of the games that we discuss tomorrow. All of our score predictions and analysis of this game will be next week. So it's going to be a very fascinating game. Ryan and I were having to talk about that. No, a buddy, my friend Jason and I were talking about that. And he was talking about how he's definitely taken Utah because of the way that the line is. I guess a lot of money's going to USC and they still haven't moved the line.
It's crazy.
So, because I guess the guys that have the biggest impact or whatever are still betting Utah. So who knows? Danny Garcia said, do you guys think that Tommy Rees is still the issue, even though some weeks the offense looks horrible and some weeks they look like a top 10 team? I don't know if I'd say the offense is yet to look like a top 10 team. Even against North Carolina, a top 10 team doesn't not get the 4th and 1 doesn't fumble the ball into the end zone at the end. They put over 60 on North Carolina's defense, in my opinion. They've looked like a top 20 offense the last couple weeks for the most part, but not a top 10 one. Do I think he's still the issue? He's part of it. Yeah, I mean, he's the offensive coordinator. Yeah, he's definitely part of it.
I don't like putting fingers at one person, man. Like I talk about this all the time, Brian, right? Everyone needs to be accountable for the inconsistencies that's been, right? It's quarterback play at times, especially early on in the season, right? There's been offensive line issues, especially early on in the season. There's been play calling issues. There's been a lot of different issues. Tommy Rees is a part of the problem, for sure. He's not the problem. Right? Like it's not a singular entity that is.
Well, let me ask you that's 100% right. It's never one person. Do you think he is the number one problem?
The main one? I think the main one early in the season was offensive line play, if I'm being completely honest. I think that did limit the offense a little bit. But
I don't think
as an entirety, I would say play calling.
I think that's a very good point. I will say this, however, I don't think he did what he needed to do to protect against that. And that was one of the issues we had. The play calling and game plans weren't designed because they thought going into the year the offensive line was going to be good. It was a strength in the fall, and I don't think they did a good enough job of preparing for that once you're not playing your own team, that there may be some issues.
Sure.
So, again, it goes back to him. But that's also partly because of him, because I feel like he could and should have done more to sort of speak up with Brian Kelly about the fact that the guys that were there weren't doing the job. I mean, that's part of your job too. In his defense, the last guy that did that got fired. Sure. The last guy that went to Brian Kelly and said, we need to get a better offensive line coach, got fired. So somewhat in Tommy Rees's defense, I mean, as a 29-year-old, 28-year-old, you're going to have the stones to walk into your head coach's office and say, I know you fired Chip for saying this 2 years ago, but this guy ain't getting the job done.
Right.
You know what I mean? Yeah. The difference is when Chip dealt with that, Chip just took over stuff and said, well, I'm going to do this anyway. And he recognized that this is a problem and he coached around it.
Right.
So, and I don't think Coach Rees doesn't have the experience that Chip had either as a coach. Right. I mean, he's 6 or 7 years behind Chip in experience as a coach. And he's had a lot more different types of experiences than Tommy had too. So he was better prepared to say, I'm going to take over the receivers, or I'm going to coach the GA up to help out, or whatever the case may be, where that's asking a lot of a 27, 28-year-old. And that's part of the reason why at the time I didn't like the hire, although I thought it would pay off, but he did, and I think if Tommy Rees stays for a while and the current staff stays together, if this current offensive staff stays together for 3 years, by year 3, this will be a special offense in my opinion. Because he'll gain a lot of experience. And I look, there's not an assistant coach on the staff that I don't think has a chance to be a really good assistant coach, or hasn't already shown himself to have the potential to be that. It's just, can you keep them all? Can you keep them all here? I think is a question. Robert Bishop's going to disagree with you, Ryan. He says, I'm surprised. He said that the worst quarterback in college football is the backup quarterback for Oklahoma. But that's a backup quarterback. It's a different argument. Right. Right. But Robert also then said, I'm surprised Oklahoma hasn't tried to give Nick Evers a shot with Gabriel being out. I agree with you. However, I can understand why you wouldn't want to start a true freshman for the first time against Texas.
Sure.
In that environment. I'm sorry. That's like it's what I criticized Georgia for last year with Anthony Richardson. Like really the first start you're going to give him is in the cocktail party in Jacksonville against the best defense in college football. That sounds like a good idea to you. Like, I don't know if I'd have put Nick Evers in that situation. Now, would I have played him earlier than they did? Yeah. Like, once it was 35-0, he's coming in the game. Like, there's no pressure on him anymore. So I didn't understand that part. That part I didn't understand at all. But I like Nick Evers. I don't know if you had a chance to see him coming out of high school. He's a kid from Texas. He's a really good football player, Ryan. You should check him out. I like him. He's a good football player. If he entered the portal and he wanted to transfer, I'd tell Notre Dame to look at it. They actually tried to get on him late last year, and he wasn't interested. So, gotcha. All right. Let's see here. Brent Smith, your thoughts on Peyton Bowen starting as a freshman?
No reason to think that he can't. I mean, it's going to have an opportunity, I would say, right? I mean, when you look at it, you're graduating DJ Brown, you're graduating Houston Griffith. There's going to be opportunities. Who knows if Brandon Joseph's going to be back for another season. Even if he is, I still think that Peyton Bowen is so talented that he can come in and compete for the second safety spot with Ramon Henderson and the Justin Walters of the world and Xavier Wattses of the world. Like, I think that he's that talented. I mean, he got bumped up to the number 14 player in the country by ESPN yesterday, Brian. And it's like, that's fully deserving, man.
On 3 has him at 15. Yeah.
Yep. Special player.
Because Ryan, what we said about him was we had him as a top 50 guy after his junior film. But what we said was if he can clean up just a couple things, he'll be a 5-star.
Yeah.
And he's done that. And he's a legit top 25 guy right now. I hope he doesn't start next year. And the reason I say that is in a perfect world scenario, he's the number 3 safety. And Brandon Joseph is back. And Ramon Henderson steps up and emerges. Or Xavier Watt steps up and emerges. Or Clarence Lewis moves to safety. And Peyton can kind of come along gradually. But as the number 3 safety, he'd play a lot. I mean, Notre Dame's rotated.
Like Kyle Hamilton did as a freshman.
Exactly. And then maybe by middle of the season, he takes over. Because I could see that where Peyton starts off in the rotation, playing 30 snaps a game in a rotation. And then the other thing I would do is there's some teams on the schedule next year where I would want him in playing nickel just because of his speed and size. You know, like there's some matchups next year like that I'd say when you go to Clemson, I could see that where you want him in the slot, you know, where they're kind of where you want a bigger, faster body in the slot than maybe some other positions. But I could also see a scenario where he starts off as the number 3 guy. He's getting 30 or so snaps a game. But as the season wears on, he steps in the starting lineup because with all due respect to whoever is playing safety opposite of Brandon Joseph, they're not Alohi Gilman or Jalen Elliott. Right. I mean, that's the reason Kyle Hamilton didn't start as a freshman because you had 2 really good veteran safeties ahead of him. You won't have that next year with Peyton Bowen. Now, if Brandon Joseph leaves after this year, which I hope he doesn't, and he shouldn't after what we've seen so far of him this year, he's been okay, but not a guy that should leave. Yeah. Then I would say then definitely he starts sooner rather than later because he'll be the most talented kid in the room. Agreed. You know, he'll always be the most talented kid in the room, but you won't have the veteran like a Brandon Joseph to kind of take one of those spots away, in my opinion. We're not Marshall. Brian and Ryan, is the field scan here to stay, or will Reese abandon it as Pine gets more experience? I think it'll be here to stay. I hope I'm wrong. Because I think that's more about Tommy Reese wanting to get the perfect play in all the time, more so than feeling the need to do that with Drew Pine. And as long as it works to a level of degree that he's willing to accept of what he thinks is good enough football, then it'll stay. And I hope not. Yeah, I hope not. I don't.
You love the field scan.
Yeah. No, not even a little bit. Not even a little bit. Next comment, Archer. I'm sorry, man. I feel really bad about this. Archer says, Brian, Facebook just put a new Busy Bone music video on my feed, and I blame you for putting that in my algorithm. Thanks for that. That's my bad.
Busy Bone. I don't know.
He was part of Bone Thugs and Harmony, which I brought up last week, and so now he's saying that that's my fault for getting that back on him. I'm really sorry about that, man. I really am. I mean, that's a group that sang a song literally about cashing their welfare checks. Ever hear the song First of the Month? They had a couple songs that were really hard that I liked, and then they just have some stuff that was just like, oh my, this is terrible. Like the First of the Month song. It was funny. The stuff that was commercial, the stuff that was popular, I didn't like. But some of the stuff that they had that wasn't really as popular was stuff that I thought was much better. Much better. See if you have any more questions down here. It's turned into a rap conversation that I'm just kind of too tired to get into today. Archer, I got into hip hop late 90s, early 2000s. So it was Jay-Z, Outkast, Kanye. So you got in later, much later than I did. I got in kind of late 80s, early 90s. It's like I got in with like Eric B and Rakim. You know what I mean? Like Wu-Tang was like, I was into rap even before Wu-Tang released their first album, which I think it was like 93, 94, something like that. So, I was listening to Tupac before he went out to California. So, but of that group that you like, I think the only one that I'm Eminem's good. I like Eminem. I never was like an Eminem fan. I respect his talent, but some of his music is just too corny for me, to be honest with you. Some of the stuff's really good. Jay-Z's earlier albums I liked. I've never been a big Kanye West fan as a rapper, just not my flavor. Outkast, though, is one of the few Southern rappers that I really liked. Like, rap groups. Like, I was never like into Ludacris. I did not like Master P and that whole clique that he had. That was definitely not my kind of music. which is funny. I never heard of Master P in that whole, I forget what it was called. No Limit Soldiers. I never heard of them until I went to college, and there was a bunch of kids from Florida on my football team as a freshman, and that's all they would listen to was Master P and like Lil Wayne and all those guys. I was like, okay, hard pass. I'm going to listen to people I can understand, so I'm going to pass on that action.
That I can understand.
But yeah, it's like it's just funny.
That's funny.
But anyway, so that was more mine. I was never into NWA because I honestly didn't really like a lot of West Coast rap early. I kind of liked Dre and Snoop when they came along. It got better. Obviously, when Tupac went out there, I liked that. But I wasn't a big NWA fan. I've never been a big Ice Cube fan. He's got a couple songs, like No Vaseline is one of the greatest. It's probably the second best ever. Just battle video, bars to put together. I still think Ether is the best, just takedown ever that Nas did on Jay-Z. It's still the best ever. I think No Vaseline might be second though. That was pretty that was his going at NWA rap, which was pretty harsh. Let's just say that it was harsh. Ryan's going to go see Blink 182 here soon, so Ryan has no clue what we're talking about. So we are definitely on the same page there. KRS-One did a feature with my favorite Christian rappers, T-Bone. T-Bone's really good. There's another. I'm trying to remember his name. But there's another really good Christian rapper, but KRS-One, he had some really good stuff back in the day. Really good stuff. So let's see if we got any more actual football questions. And let me see here. I'm going to try to find it. I don't see any more football questions that I can see here. Somebody said Beastie Boys. I was never a Beastie Boys fan. It's like Beastie Boys had some stuff that you'd like play at like a party, but like I was never a Beastie Boys guy. Digital Underground, it's okay. Who doesn't know Humpty Hump though, right? So yeah, a lot of stuff here. And then of course Beefeater had to ruin it all. Nickelback. So just totally ruined the whole thing, man. Totally ruined the whole thing. So anyway, so that's going to do it for today's show, everybody. Appreciate y'all very, very much. Thank you for joining us on today's show. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast. Don't forget, Saturday, between 3 and 3:30, you're going to want to be over by the Dome. You're going to want to find us. You're going to want to find Irish Breakdown. You'll see me. You'll see the flag. You'll see our table set up. You're definitely going to be there. Definitely going to be there for our live show. I promise you. Not only is it our first one, but it's going to be good. It's going to be good. So really want you all to be there for that. It's going to be worth it. I promise. So make sure that you are there for that this weekend. So for Ryan, I'm Brian. Have a great rest of your day. 6:00 tonight. Sean will be back. IB Nation Sports Talk. Ryan will be back to 1:00 tomorrow for some predictions. Talk to you guys very soon on the Irish Breakdown podcast.